The Chancellor will reveal his plans to pump up productivity and transform the British economy.
Good morning. It's 6 o'clock on Friday the 27th of January and this is Breakfast on GB News with Stephen and me, Angela. Here are our top stories this morning.
British genius and hard work will be at the centre of Jeremy Hunt's new economic growth policy. The Chancellor is set to announce his plans at a major speech in London, where he'll also make the case for further investment in British business by tearing up EU red tape.
11 people have died after further Russian missile strikes across Ukraine. The latest barrage of attacks follows the announcement of additional military support from the West, with Germany and the United States the latest to say they will send battle tanks to aid Ukrainian forces.
And the Prince and Princess of Wales have been helping out at their local food bank in Windsor. The couple assisted volunteers sorting through food donations and spoke to members of the community. Our royal reporter will bring us all the details.
And of course, as ever, you can join in any of our discussions. You just have to email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
So, let's start with the news, should we, that Jeremy Hunt will use a major speech today to insist that he is serious about boosting economic growth in the UK as he outlines proposals to unlock £100 billion of investment.
Now, the Chancellor plans to focus on key growth industries such as digital technology, advanced manufacturing and creative industries. And he's also going to set out a long-term plan to tackle poor productivity.
And the Chancellor will suggest that a wider bonfire of EU rules will be needed as ministers push ahead with plans to review all EU laws still on the UK statute book this year.
Well, joining us now to tell us more is the political commentator Peter Spencer. Good morning to you, Peter.
Good morning to you both.
I mean, I think we're all going to be waiting. I don't think the Chancellor's going to talk till about 9:20. But if you read the front page of the Daily Mail today, it's got virtually word for word his entire speech. So it's not all going to come as a surprise to us. You've read it. What do you make of it?
Well, I do note that he's managed to generate a headline which doesn't include the words Nadim or Sahawi in it.
Well, we'll come to that in a moment.
Sure. That said, I mean, there's been a week of bad news from practically every front. The CBI said things are not looking good. The Office of Budget Responsibility said, look, we're going to have a great deal less. You are going to have a great deal less headroom than you thought you were going to have. And so he comes up and says, hey, listen, guys, everything's going to be fine. I mean, it sort of reminds me of the payoff line in that iconic film, The Italian Job, when Michael Caine said, when the bus is hanging over the edge, hey, don't worry, lads, I've got a plan.
But is it a plan that's going to work? That's the important thing.
Well, I mean, who knows? But we're talking about some point in the distant future. This is sunny upland stuff, for heaven's sake. And, I mean, the one good thing is that inflation is set to fall significantly. But apart from that, I mean, he talks about the bonfire of EU regulations. Well, everybody knows that's a vast job and it cannot happen quickly. It's just not possible, too much of it.
And yet, in all of this, I mean, how much pressure is on him? Because the Labour Party is coming up with growth plans now, and it's growth that we desperately need. I mean, he's got to come up with something.
Well, what he's saying is we're going to get it, but he's just not saying when, because it's all very well to say, listen, things are going to be fine, but, I mean, how are you going to actually make it happen? He's not the person... he governs the economy, but he doesn't run the factories. He doesn't actually bring the money in from overseas that we're going to need and all the rest of it. So it is a little bit of sort of, whistling to keep your spirits up.
But I mean, one of the things, I think probably the big headline that will come out of it is he's hoping he's going to release £100 billion by getting rid of one of the EU regulations, which means that now he will allow insurance companies and other organisations to be able to put money into capital projects in Britain, which they've not been able to do until now. So this is sort of really giving a kick to the economy by the back door, isn't it?
Yes, and if it works, it will help significantly. And but if it doesn't, well, then he's back where he was. I mean, I do take the overall point, which is that you've got a succession of governments in the post-war years simply managing orderly decline. And he's saying, look, we're going to turn this round. Well, fingers crossed he's right.
I mean, he might just be whistling a happy tune, as you
say,
say, Peter, but we need a happy tune, don't we? The government needs a happy tune.
Yeah.
With everything that's gone on at the moment. I mean, talks yesterday of potentially a mini reshuffle. I mean, all of that would just spell disaster, wouldn't it? Because it shows instability.
It does show instability, yes. And of course, the other thing that's worth remembering is that all this, that in a few days' time, we've got something approaching a general strike on our hands, which will produce a great deal of problems for a great many people, not least parents of children who won't be able to go to school. And doubly embarrassing for Rishi Sunak is even the Mr. Quelches at his old posh school will be downing mortarboards.
You say the embarrassment that Richie's going to have, and the big embarrassment he's got at the moment is, of course, what to do with the former Chancellor, Mr. Khan. Yes, now, I mean, I think there are a lot of people who are thinking, why is he hanging on at the moment? Why is he not just doing the honourable thing and going?
He thinks he can front it out, but I do have to say that there is a consensus growing in the upper echelons of the Tory party, never mind elsewhere, that it's not a matter of if but when. And in the meantime, Rishi Sunak is expending what political capital he has in hanging on to him. OK, the guy did do a good job in rolling out the COVID vaccine. But against that, you look at, I mean, it was so damning when we had the head of the chief taxman yesterday saying, look, we don't fine people if it's an accidental mistake. But if it's accidentally on purpose, then we do. And this wasn't so much a matter of, what he was, between the lines, what he was saying wasn't so much a matter of naughty boy. It was a matter of hold your hand out, naughty boy, a very naughty boy.
But the problem with that is, I mean, you can understand the sort of pressure to say, look, just go, draw a line under all of this. But it doesn't actually draw a line, does it, as far as the opposition goes and as far as the Tories' popularity in the country goes? I mean, the poll ratings...
Popularity?
Well, exactly.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting that Rishi Sunak has consistently outpolled his own party's miserable standing. But at the same time, what this does bring into relief is his own wife's non-dom status and all the slightly slippy-slidey tax arrangements there. And also, there's, from the point of view of the man in the street, the man or woman in the street, is that we're talking such vast sums of money that they're telephone numbers to anyone else.
If he had to pay a £5 billion fine, it does make you wonder how much he actually earned to have to pay that.
Precisely.
Yeah.
OK. Peter, for now, thank you. We'll catch up with you in the next hour.
Thanks, Peter.
God bless you.
It's 8 minutes past 6. Let's bring you up to date with some of the day's other top stories.
A former soldier found guilty of killing a man at an army checkpoint in Northern Ireland more than 30 years ago is going to be sentenced today. David Holden was convicted in November of the manslaughter of Aidan McAnispy back in 1988. He was the first veteran to be found guilty of an historical offence since the Good Friday Agreement.
About 31 million people were affected by postal delays over Christmas. Citizens Advice said the Royal Mail let down consumers for a third year running. More than 2 million people say they missed a health appointment due to the delays. 3 million said they failed to receive important documents.
The government has refused to confirm that HS2 will reach its central London terminus. This follows reports in The Sun that claim that the rail project may not run to Euston Station until 2038, or that the London leg may be scrapped entirely due to inflation. The Department for Transport says the government remains committed to delivering HS2 to Manchester.
And the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, was paid £320,000 to appear on I'm a Celebrity. The fee's been listed on the MP's Register of Financial Interests. He had the Conservative whip suspended for taking part in the show while Parliament was sitting. More than 1,000 complaints were made to the broadcasting watchdog Ofcom. I'm not surprised about... I know you want to talk about Matt Hancock, don't you? Go on.
No, I'm not. No, I'm just thinking over £250,000 to appear in a television programme. I mean, one programme, not even a whole series.
No. I mean, it's staggering, isn't it? It's absolutely staggering.
It is, yes.
But I was thinking the Royal Mail story. I mean, I know there are important issues with people like missing appointments and important documents. I got a Christmas card last week from my brother and sister-in-law, and you just think, oh, well, that was nice.
Yes.
So it's little things like that, isn't it?
I know. I did a story recently about Every, who handle millions of parcels every single day. And they were, I think, bottom of a list of customer satisfaction. But, you know, when you think about how many parcels and postage things are going through the system, it's amazing that things don't get lost, actually. But I have to say that the chief executive for Every was saying, you know, those of us who are dealing with parcels when they go missing, we feel it as well, because we know how important letters, cards, parcels, anything are to the people who are wanting to receive them.
I wonder if about time we paid them a bit more attention. We're a bit more grateful every day when the postie comes and things, because...
Oh, I'm always grateful when my postie turns up. Yes, know them all by name. They're lovely.
Do you?
Yes.
Oh, see, that's nice. That's nice. I've got a familiar one, but I don't know his name.
Yeah.
I need to work on
Tell
that.
you what strikes me about them. Even in the middle of the winter, they're still wearing their shorts. Don't know how they do.
This is true. They must be freezing.
I know.
Oh, dear me. If you're a postie, get in touch this morning.
Yeah.
Tell us why always the shorts. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, the war in Ukraine continues to escalate after the US and Germany agreed to deliver tanks to Kyiv.
The state's emergency service says 11 people have been killed and 11 others wounded in a new wave of Russian missile attacks right across Ukraine yesterday.
Well, let's talk to Oleksiy Goncharenko, who's a Ukrainian member of parliament. Good morning to you. Good to see you, as always. Look, first and foremost, on the tanks issue, because it's an important development. We don't know when Ukraine is going to get access to them, but what sort of difference do you think that is actually going to make to you?
It is important because it's clear that we need armor, tanks, armored vehicles to liberate our territories, and this means finally to finish this war, because the war will continue till Ukraine will liberate all our territories. Sooner we will do everything will finish. So for these tanks are absolutely vital. And so we're thankful for the decisions made by British government, American government and German government. Finally, after many months of thinking, German government also made a decision. And now we are waiting for exact number of tanks that we will receive, because we need to understand that Russia had at the beginning of the invasion near 13,000 tanks. 13,000. So if we will just receive 10, 20 or 30 tanks, it will change nothing. But I hope that we will speak about hundreds of tanks.
In fact, you're going to get, I think, at the moment, about 45 tanks. Now, your president has asked for 300, and you're not even going to get these tanks for several months. And in fact, the American tanks probably won't be with you until the end of the year. So what is going to happen in the meantime? You really are exposed, aren't you?
Yeah, it will take time. That's why we were urging our partners to move ahead quicker and to make a decision quicker. But we have what we have. Now Ukraine is fighting in the eastern part. It's both. There are some parts of the front line where Ukraine is in offensive. There are some parts where Russia is in offensive. So, but in general, it looks like for the moment as a First World War, trench war. Huge artillery shelling and many casualties from both sides, but certainly from Russian more, because they try to attack in some areas where they have absolutely unbelievable casualties. I spent Christmas with our brigades near Bakhmut, and what I saw there, the fields full of corpses of Russian soldiers and officers, it's something... I never thought that I could see something like this in my life.
Do you think, I mean, Russia's made the accusation again, and through the agreement on tanks, which you now have, made the agreement that the West, that NATO is basically involved in this fight. Do you think it is? Do you think NATO should actually do more?
I think that it's a good question. I mean, it's clear that there are no boots on the ground. Ukraine's fighting on ourselves. Our soldiers and officers are fighting and dying also. But definitely, without weaponry supply from NATO, it would be very, very hard for us. So Russia is definitely not saying truth, saying that NATO is directly involved, but indirectly NATO is involved. And that's why I think I can't understand why these decisions about tanks finally made now. But still, there are many other decisions which are still not made. Fighter jets, heavy drones. I was in territorial defense first month when we were defending Kiev last year. And I can tell you that if Ukraine would have in March weaponry that we received in May, June, we would finish everything, absolutely everything in April. And that would be great for the whole world, including even Russia. But we didn't. We didn't have what to purchase Russians when they were retreating from Kiev. And all the time the same. So all the time NATO and the free world is like chasing after Russian escalation. So that's something which worries me a lot.
OK. Mr. Gonchenko, we've got to leave it there. Really good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Now, the Electoral Commission and councils across the country are urging people to make sure that they're prepared for this year's May elections.
That's because, for the first time in Great Britain, voters in all elections in England, some elections in Scotland and Wales, will have to show photo ID at their polling station to get their ballot.
Well, our reporter Jack Carson has looked into the change.
In this year's local elections, history will be made. It will be the first time that voters in Great Britain will have to show a photo ID in order to get their ballot. It's not new to the UK, with Northern Ireland having the rule in place since 2002, but for voters in Britain, the change came as part of the 2022 Elections Act. There was opposition that it might disenfranchise voters, but the passing of the bill into law in April of last year means the electorate is now being asked to make sure it's prepared for this summer. Craig Westwood from the Electoral Commission explains what will be new for voters when they head to the polls for the local elections.
After each set of elections, there are a lot of people that do feel concerned that you can go into a polling station and get a ballot paper without having to demonstrate and confirm who you are. So there won't be that much difference. So you will go in and you will find a desk of a presiding officer and their team in front of you. They will ask for your name and address, check it off on the electoral register, as is normally the practice. But then there'll be an additional step of them asking to see your photo ID. There are lots of different types of ID which are eligible. They'll check that ID, and then once it's confirmed, they'll give you your ballot paper.
Not everyone is pleased the introduction of voter ID is here. Dr. Jess Garland from the Electoral Reform Society still has concerns about its practicality.
The government's asking voters to bring photographic ID. It's a type of ID that we know from the government's own research that over 2 million, about 4% of people don't actually have. And we know that it's also not equally spread across society. So if you're unemployed, if you're older, if you have a disability, you're much less likely to have the sort of ID that the government's asking you to provide in order to vote. And so clearly that is taking a huge risk with the next election. What we don't want to see is people being turned away from the polling station just because they don't have the right papers.
The Electoral Commission report on electoral fraud in 2014 found no evidence of systematic polling station fraud, but warned that polling stations remain vulnerable because of the few checks in place to check identity. Obtaining the most common forms of photo ID, such as a passport or driving licence, involves a fee, but the Electoral Commission stress a free voter authority certificate will ensure no member of the electorate is left out.
It is right that if people don't have eligible ID, including the free ID that's available, they will not be able to vote on polling day. But there are some other groups, such as the over 85s, who have lower levels of ID ownership. For them and for all other people who don't have ID, as you say, the voter authority certificate is there, and that is a free backup so that anybody who doesn't have ID can still make sure they get to vote on polling day.
The full list of accepted forms of ID is available on the government website, so people can be sure they're not caught out at the polling station from this summer onwards. Jack Carson, GB News.
This has caused a bit of upset in the newsroom.
I think it has.
Yes, a bit
you
of...
and I don't mind it.
No, we think it's all right.
Because we have photo ID, passports, driving licences.
Yeah.
And other people say, as we heard in the film, they don't have any form of photo ID.
Do you think the free ID that you can get is going to be helpful? It's a case of getting that message out, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? I think if people know they need some kind of photo identity, as long as they're given time to get it, that's the important thing, isn't it? Have time to get it, make sure you take it with you.
Yeah.
Bus pass, perhaps.
Well, maybe that should do. It's got your picture on it. Why
Exactly.
not?
Yeah.
Let us know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk.
And stay with us as we look at Food Bank in Windsor, which has received some royal assistance. That's coming up just after your weather update.
Hello, very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGiven. A frosty and foggy start to the day for some of us, but actually it's going to turn out largely dry and bright across the UK. One exception, the far northwest, where this cold front will start to push outbreaks of rain and a freshening wind in later in the day. Otherwise, a ridge of high pressure extends across the country, leading to plenty of dry and bright weather. The best of any sunshine first thing through northern England, parts of West Wales, for example, and some areas of Scotland as well as Northern Ireland, although there'll also be some fog patches about. The most dense fog in Northern Ireland will tend to lift during the morning as cloud encroaches from the northwest, that cloud bringing some wind and rain to the Western Isles by the afternoon. But otherwise, for most it's dry and bright. We'll have lost the showers that we saw yesterday in the east, and so sunny spells for England and Wales, southern and eastern Scotland, and typical temperatures 7 or 8 Celsius. Then, heading into Friday night, we keep the clear skies across much of England and Wales. Scotland and Northern Ireland will see a period of rain, but the rain tending to peter out as it pushes south. And by the end of the night, there's not much left. However, there will be an area of cloud, and that will keep things frost and fog free. Central Scotland still possibly getting down to 0 or just below. And for southern England, South Wales, that's where we'll see more extensive frost and fog patches, as low as -5 Celsius in some sheltered spots. But once the frost and fog clear, well, plenty of sunny spells for southern parts of the UK and brighter skies for Scotland and Northern Ireland, although a brisk breeze will bring some showers into the far north and northwest. And this area of cloud across central areas, Northern England, North Wales, the Midlands, will keep things fairly grey. 6 to 8 Celsius on Saturday, a bit milder in the north on Sunday, but also much windier with some wet weather pushing through Scotland and Northern Ireland.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
.24, very good morning to you. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Angela.
The Prince and Princess of Wales have been hands-on at a food bank close to their home in the Royal Windsor estate, packing food parcels for those who are in need.
Now, it's understood their Royal Highnesses wanted to support those helping families struggling with the rising cost of living.
So our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, has this from Windsor Food Share.
Windsor's known for 1,000 years of royal history, but less than 2 miles from the famous castle, some locals rely on donations to stop them going hungry. The Prince and Princess of Wales were keen to visit Windsor Food Share to help volunteers sort food parcels and learn about the support they provide. Sarah Kember, who manages the service, thinks the free time people give up to help others is invaluable.
I'm so lucky we have such an amazing bunch of volunteers willing to do stuff for us and come in and help. They do deliveries to people's homes, collect from supermarkets for us, and without them it wouldn't be possible. Without donations we receive from the local community and the local supermarkets, again, just wouldn't be possible.
William and Catherine learnt how demand has soared due to the rising cost of living. Last year, Windsor Food Share helped feed over 7,000 residents. That's an 18% increase on the year before. Food parcels, which hold bread, eggs, fresh fruit and vegetables, are given to any local household where it's likely a lack of money means people go hungry. Toiletries and cleaning products are also given out each month. Windsor Christian Action, which runs the food bank at Dedworth Green Baptist Church, explains what a royal visit means for the community.
We thought it would be wonderful for them to come and see and have hands-on experience. Hugely encouraging for our volunteers, and also it raises the profile, and at a time when need is increasing and publicity is good.
The Prince and Princess of Wales live with their 3 children just a short drive from the Windsor Food Share on the private royal estate. It's understood Prince William and Princess Catherine were keen to support their neighbours, who are a lot less fortunate than themselves.
I'd love your ideas and thoughts about where we can make the biggest difference.
Next week, Princess Catherine is expected to launch a national campaign to help the youngest in society improve their futures. It's understood this is her legacy moment, improving children's lives for generations to come. Cameron Walker, GB News, Windsor.
They're doing a great job, aren't they?
I'm a real fan.
Yeah.
I have to say.
I am too.
They have a dignity about them, I think.
Yeah, I tell you what's great, though, looking at them. I mean, first of all, Catherine always looks amazing.
Yeah.
But she doesn't just wear high-end stuff. She goes to shop in the local shops. I mean, one of the jackets that she was wearing there was from Marks and Spencer's. And it's so nice to see a member of the royal family doing something like that, which is sort of semi-official. But there's William in a sweater and a shirt. You know, he's not done up in a jacket and tie, and just looking like one of the boys.
Yes, yeah, I do think that's really nice.
And I do wish the press would stop calling her Kate Middleton, because she hasn't been Kate Middleton since before she got married.
A very long time.
Very long time.
Loads of people getting in touch this morning. Thank you very much indeed. Lots of people, including David, Teresa and Matt. All delighted to see you, Angela.
Oh, thank you. Good morning. Nice to see you too.
I should say, we've worked together before,
We did. How long ago was it, Steve?
23 years ago.
And we still look the same, don't we?
We do. We've not aged a day. Not a day. It was me, you and Martin Lewis, wasn't it?
It was. Hasn't the boy done well?
Oh,
hasn't he just done well? Yes.
He has, yeah. So there you go. But it's nice to be reunited. There you go. It's a real treat for me.
Well, I should be here for this weekend and next weekend.
Fabulous.
So we've got lots of catching up to do.
Oh, yes, we have.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, you're watching us.
Like
We're here having a private conversation.
They love all of this, don't you? Look, we've got loads coming up for you, including all the stories from the newspapers with Liz Kershaw and Benedict Spence.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous. Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 6:31. Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Angela.
Let's take a look at today's front pages, and we've got two super guests with us. We're going to start with Jeremy Hunt in the Mail today. He's saying it is time to stop talking Britain down, as he will set out his plan for growth a bit later this morning.
The Telegraph says Nicola Sturgeon's trans law is in disarray after she was forced to announce that the offender, Isla Bryson, will have to stay in a male prison.
While the Mirror leads with legendary singer Sir Rod Stewart launching an attack on the Tories over their handling of the NHS.
In The Sun, Top Gear presenter Freddie Flintoff has put his TV career on hold after pleas from his family following a horror car crash.
While The Guardian reports that Windrush campaigners have described the government's decision to drop crucial reform commitments as a slap in the face.
OK, let's go through some of those then with political commentator Benedict Spence and legendary broadcaster Liz Kershaw. Good morning to you both.
Morning, both. We're starting with you. We're looking at Jeremy Hunt on the front page, aren't we, I think, Benedict?
On the front page of The Express and also of The Mail, where he has been told by members of his party to stop being so downbeat, to stop being so negative about the future of the UK and about the economic forecasts. And, of course, we all know that we're facing a very difficult year, and that's part of the knock-on from everything from Ukraine and the pandemic and 10 years of missed growth in this country. And it's sort of, you know, I understand why this is coming along. There's this idea that, you know, the Tory party is sort of in a bit of a terminal decline, and if you constantly talking everything down, then that sort of feeds into the sense of spiralling. It is difficult to see how you can justify just sort of changing your mindset towards the economy and magically it'll grow. But in the Express, Ian Duncan Smith is saying that Jeremy Hunt should change his outlook, change his economic forecast, which, you know, again, Mr. Sunak and Mr. Hunt came in off the back of a slightly bumpy ride where under Liz Truss, and, you know, they did have to put their... Yes, it's early in the morning, and I'm sort of restraining myself. And then, you know, their job was to sort of put a firm hand on the tiller and sort of just get things under control rather than sort of go for growth or anything like that. And I think it's easy to lose sight of that actually they inherited a very bad economic situation. It's still not actually a very good one. But, you know, this is what Ian Duncan Smith wants. He wants them to be a little more proactive, a little more upbeat, and presumably he thinks that the rest of the country will follow suit.
I love one of the quotes, sorry, just 1 second. One of the quotes that Mr. Hunt is going to give today is that he's looking at long-term prosperity based on British genius and British hard work.
It's a nice thought. It'd be nice to see it reflected in the Tory party. You know, if they would start there, that would be good.
What do you reckon, Liz?
I agree that British ingenuity is the way forward. He says he's going to support the creative sector. That's something that is, you know, world-beating. When you think about, because of the advantage of the English language throughout the world, then our literature, our films, our TV programmes, our music, it's often sniffed at, pop, trivial, worth millions and billions, and the soft power influence it has as well. I think it's great that he's going to encourage that. What I just feel is that apparently he's going to consult Mel Stride, who's been Treasury Minister and Common Select Committee for donkey's years now. One of the things, Napoleon called us a nation of shopkeepers. And one of the ways that Britain can thrive and grow, growth is what we're after, and be more productive, is to encourage entrepreneurialism and start-ups and individuals having a great idea and turning it into a business and making money and employing people, not just in the creative sector, but, you know, think of Dyson, James Dyson, and he had great technical ideas, but people need help. One of the things that's been going on in this country for the last 10, 15 years is the attack on the self-employed through the taxation system. Eamon's been a famous victim of it as well, and this thing called IR35, where you're actually drilling down on people who are taking risks and being self-sufficient. I think that they need to be honest about that and have an overhaul of that, because the other factor at the moment is that the over 50s are dropping out of the workplace in the droves.
But he wants them all back.
He wants them back. You've got to give people incentives. There's a lot of people who are sitting at home and thinking, I am not going out to work anymore because I am sick of being penalised by the tax system.
Kwasi Kwarteng, as Chancellor, was scrapping the IR35.
Yeah, and that was brilliant.
But that was obviously reversed then when he was out of office, because they want the money, don't they? I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, but we have got such a low productivity rate in this country. But as I always say, always banging on about this, let's get it into perspective. It's a lot worse in France. It is a lot worse in France.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting to point out, because one of the things that is going to be addressed in Jeremy Hunt's speech about the future of growth in this country is EU regulations. Is the fact that we haven't got rid of as many EU regulations as perhaps some people might imagine, given that we've got Brexit done. We're still sort of beholden to thousands of these things, and that's one of the key things, is about cutting red tape for entrepreneurs, for businesses, and the sort of the hangover from the period of EU membership is still there, and that's something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
Let's have a look. I just think it's the headline of the day.
Yeah.
We are failing.
We are failing.
Rod Stewart in the Mirror.
Well, my Rod song that immediately came to mind is I Don't Want to Talk About It. Well, quite clearly he does. And he sort of photo-bombed in a audio way Sky News last night by calling in. And, you know, I love Rod Stewart. I love his music. I've always loved his sort of laddish, ordinary guy in the pub attitude. I'd love to go out for a pint with Rod Stewart. So he's a caring guy, and he really is upset about what's going on in the NHS. Just, again, an aside, put it into perspective, not all trusts, hospital trusts, are affected by these strikes. My hairdresser yesterday was going to pick up her daughter, who's a nurse at Milton Keynes Hospital. There's no nurses or ambulance or anything on strike in that trust.
I was in Preston 2 days ago, filming there at the Royal Preston Hospital. Everybody was on site.
Yeah, and so it's not nationwide. So let's just be real about that. But, yeah, the NHS is in a mess. One of the things about productivity is a healthy population, a healthy workforce. The Labour Party didn't introduce the National Health Service in 1948 for truly altruistic reasons. They did it because we needed to dig ourselves out of the pit after the war. And you couldn't do that if people were suffering from terrible lung conditions or the after effects of war. They needed a healthy population. We need a healthy population, and we spend billions. I read the other day we're now spending 130 billion more on the NHS than we were a couple of decades ago. So what's going wrong?
Who's getting that money? It doesn't seem to be going to the frontline staff.
It's poor management. And what amazes me in all this business about nurses and doctors and ambulance drivers and everybody down to the cooks and the porters wanting better wages, Everybody said the government needs to sort this out. More than half of the NHS workforce are management and administration. So why aren't they doing their job and sorting out the pay and conditions of their workforce?
We'll look at this a bit later in the programme, won't we?
We're going to. In terms of Rod, is it wrong for me to point out that, I mean, he's sort of saying we're failing, we need more money in the system, all the rest of it. He moved abroad in 1975 because he didn't want to pay the top rate of tax.
Well, we are failing. We are sailing. He famously left with Brit Eklund to avoid the top tax rate. Loads of musicians did. The Rolling Stones did it when tax was 98% under Harold Wilson's government. And famously, Robert Plant of Led Zeppelin, he was on the Led Zeppelin private jet or something. He urgently needed something like an appendectomy, and he couldn't land in Britain to go into a hospital because he'd immediately have to pay a huge tax bill.
Let's take away from Rod the fact that he's come up to the mark.
Oh, and potholes. Potholes.
It also makes you wonder who could possibly be watching. You never know who's going to be watching you. So you're just there. You're presenting Sky News. You're the producer back there, and then suddenly you get a call from Rod Stewart, and you think.
Yeah, hello, we're going to take this one.
Well, if there are any...
You don't want to be watching Sky News.
If there are any rock stars watching this morning, who would you most like to phone in, Stephen?
If you consider yourself famous, please do write in.
Well, in the meantime, Benedict, you've been looking at what's happening about Nadeem Sommelier.
Oh yes. Away from all the fun and games, it's back to the magnificence of the situation in government, and it's getting incredibly embarrassing now. Actually, the fact of the matter is Nadeem Zahawi, former Chancellor, let's continue to remind ourselves, has given...
Very briefly,
but nonetheless...
Long enough to do major damage.
Sort of Berlusconi levels of chutzpah to, if you know that you have some tax issues in your past, to sort of elevate yourself to that position, given the circumstances, even if for a few weeks. I think that that's an incredibly bold thing to have done. Anyway, he's given permission for HMRC to go through his tax history. He clearly, therefore, feels that he hasn't done anything wrong.
He's given permission. I don't think HMRC needs our permission.
Well, this is how it's being framed, because, of course, he wants to put the record straight and say that I've done nothing wrong. But of course, the problem is that the damage is done. The chief executive of HMRC has said you don't get penalties for making innocent mistakes. That's not how it works. And this is, as you say, the damage is done. It's very embarrassing, actually, that no firm action has been taken, either from Rishi Sunak in saying thanks but off you go, or from Mr Zahawi himself, who I have to say actually was one of the few ministers who emerged from the Boris Johnson administration, if not with his reputation enhanced because of the vaccines, then at the very least just about intact. He was one of the few, I think, that people were looking at and going, actually, he's done a fair whack, he's done a fair job. So for Mr Zahawi to...
as a potential leader.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we forget, of course, he got the job of Chancellor because everybody thought it would be absolutely fatal to Boris Johnson if he too resigned from his position as, I think, he was education minister at the time. So he was a big beast. I think it's just a matter of months ago he was seen as pivotal to the future of that government. And now here we are. Really, he is too toxic, I think. Whatever he believes, whether he's done any wrongdoing or not, whatever HMRC actually believes ultimately, whatever the findings are, you cannot be a senior Tory minister and former Chancellor and be sat there with question marks over millions of pounds of tax against your name. It's just not possible to come back, I think.
Bearing in mind the damage he has therefore done to his own reputation and the damage that is being done to Rishi Sunak at the moment, which we were talking about by the extension.
Exactly.
At what point does a minister have to say, I'm going to take the honourable decision and step back from this and resign, without waiting to be pushed off the cliff?
Frequently, it should happen much, much sooner than it seems to happen these days. I know that we all get a bit nostalgic every now and then, but there did once upon a time seem to be a point where ministers, because they were pushed earlier or because, they had some sense of duty, would step aside earlier. Not just entirely for altruistic reasons. They understand that they're doing more damage to their own careers if they sort of, keep the headlines going. But this seems to be a very different way of thinking now in government, which is if you can, Boris Johnson, hang on like a tick, maybe you'll get away with it. Maybe you'll just survive until the next crisis, which isn't a particularly healthy way to run a government, but that is the government that we currently have.
So is the consensus, can I just ask both of you, because Liz, we're coming to you next, is he going to go? And is it going to be later rather than sooner?
Well, I would say in this country, you're innocent until proved guilty, and I'm not here to defend him. And I would say the reason people hang on is because the calibre of the pool to choose from is really rather poor. So who else do you go to? But questions are being asked, and they're being asked by a body, a person that was set up by Rishi Sunak at the behest of the Labour Party, etc., to investigate incidents like this, and that's what's currently happening. So I think we should wait for the outcome of that. Let's hope it's sooner rather than later. And meanwhile, the British public isn't being served well by all this fixation on one man and his tax return, because I had to switch to foreign news channels on the television this week to find out what's actually going on in the world once again, because the agenda on the main bulletins, on the main channels, is just psychotically fixating on this. And there are bigger things to do.
There are some stories like, the Dominic Raab bullying stories that I do kind of look at and think, is there really that much here? It seems to be quite sort of low-hanging allegations. But I do think, actually, when the tax burden is at its highest in sort of living memory, it is not unfair for people to fixate on a government minister in charge of, in some ways, making those decisions, or at least has oversight on them, not potentially paying his fair share.
But the other headlines have been about Nicola Sturgeon, haven't they? And that's one that's caught your eye this morning.
See, can I just say, this worries me because I think it's such a nuanced subject.
The transgender...
The trans issue, and they're talking about this rapist who claims to be a woman who is now being moved to a male prison. You've got to bear in mind with this rapist only decided that they were transitioning after they'd been accused of rape.
Yeah, and some people are saying that's a convenient tool because they thought, oh, I'll turn into a woman with a wig and a nice padded ski jacket and all the visual attributes of being female, but that'll get me a softer ride if I'm convicted. So that's one argument.
Yeah.
The thing is that you have to go back and ask yourself, why do we have male and female prisons? Why? I don't know. I've never asked the prison service. Well, it's presumably some kind of stop everybody getting it on while they're in jail and to protect people. It's still the sexual abuse in all male prisons and the sexual abuse in all female prisons. But to put somebody who's been shown to be violently sexual into a place where it's hard to say this without offending people at this hour of the day, but where he's got male parts and he could perform a penetrative act, which is rape, in the confines of a prison. It's like putting a fox among the chickens. Some would say. The thing about the story, though, is Nicola Sturgeon's place in it all. Did she know? Was she consulted by the Scottish Prison Service? It's saying in the Times, when you go inside the paper, it's inconceivable that the Scottish Prison Service would have made a decision of this kind without consulting ministers. Maybe not the First Minister, but ministers. Anyway, she's now backtracked, but she still refuses to say whether she thinks this individual is a man or a woman, is male or female.
But that's where the self-determination thing comes.
Well, that's why it's calling out the whole policy that she's introduced in Scotland of self-determination, where you don't need medical examination, assessment into question. I mean, it's like school. Somebody pointed out yesterday, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. If she brings it down to 16, and most people are in education now until they're 18. You don't need your parents' consent. You can go into school and you can go into a girls' school and you can say, actually, I'm not a girl anymore. And then what does the school do?
Yeah, well, there are questions that need to be answered. Look, we've got to leave it there. Liz, Benedict, thank you both very much indeed. We'll see you a little bit later on.
Yep. Let's bring you up to date in the meantime with some of today's other top stories.
A former soldier found guilty of killing a man at an army checkpoint in Northern Ireland more than 30 years ago is going to be sentenced today. David Holden was convicted in November of manslaughter back in 1988. He was the first veteran to be found guilty of a historic offence since the Good Friday Agreement.
An estimated 31 million people were affected by postal delays over Christmas. Citizens Advice said the Royal Mail let down consumers for a third year running. More than 2 million people say they missed a health appointment due to the delays, whilst 3 million said they failed to receive important documents.
King's College London has discovered a new test that could detect Alzheimer's years before a clinical diagnosis. The university collected blood samples from people with mild cognitive impairment. The college found the blood test can spot cognitive changes and predict the risk of Alzheimer's 3.5 years before being diagnosed. No, we were both going for it there, weren't we? There you go, you first.
All right. A much anticipated Madonna biopic has been scrapped after the singer announced that her world tour last week.
Now, the film was going to star the Ozark actor Julia Garner and was going to be directed by Madge herself.
Well, joining us now is our show business reporter, and that is Stephanie Tecci.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you guys doing
we're
today?
all right.
Good,
But this is bad news for Madge, then.
Yeah, it is bad news. I guess the writings was on the wall from last week when she announced that she was going to be going on tour for her celebration tour, which is going to be a tour of all of her greatest hits. It's 65 dates, so it's going to be very gruelling for Madge. She's going to be away from July until the end of December. So for her to be doing that tour and doing this biopic at the same time, it would have been quite gruelling for her.
What is she doing in the biopic?
So,
I mean, she's not directing it, is she?
She is directing it. She wanted total control. There's been talk about this biopic for many years. Because see it this way, biopics are very big businesses in Hollywood. You know, Bohemian Rhapsody, which was based on Freddie Mercury, that banked £911 million. So can you imagine one on Madonna? That is just going to be an ultimate box office smash. And the fact is, with Madonna, she's had a lot of attempts over the years for people who wanted to do the biopic, but she never wanted a man to do it because she says that, you know, all the scripts she's seen before have been quite sleazy, just not really to her taste. So she wanted to direct this. She co-wrote it. She used to put in these scripts. The draft of the scripts were coming up to 180 pages. So she was working with Universal, and they were like, this is a bit too long for a film. So there was discussions that maybe it would have been split into 2 movies, or maybe it would have been like a Harry Potter series where they'll have like a chapter 1 on Madonna, chapter 2, or maybe it would have been a TV series. But I feel more sorry for the actresses like Julia Garner because it was a gruelling audition process. You know, Madonna made them spend 11 hours a day with her own choreographer learning how to do her dance. They had to perform in front of Madonna. They had to do readings in front of Madonna. So it was quite, you know, it's quite hurtful as an actress when you start doing all this work and then for it to be scrapped.
Look at what they might have turned down in the meantime.
Yeah. You know, just practising this, you know, this was announced in 2020, so, you know, 3 years of dedication, and also for our fans who would love to see such a film on air, it's a bit heartbreaking.
Can I just put to you a quote that she made? She said, it is essential to share the roller coaster ride of my life with my voice and my mission. Yeah. It's essential.
Ooh, I think this is where the diva-isms of Madonna's coming through. And as well, she called it a visual autobiography. So you can imagine Madonna was really quite close to this biopic. Sometimes that's why Hollywood tend to do biopics after the person's died. Because if you're doing it on someone who's still alive, they're going to want full creative control. They're going to have so much say. So I think this is why it hasn't managed to get off the ground. But, you know, for her to be doing her Celebration World Tour, which is equally as pleasing for fans, you can't do both.
You can't do everything.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll come back later
I think it will come back. I think it could be a TV series. I think that's what it's looking like.
Well, one of those iconic moments in Madonna's career, of course, is when she was on stage with Britney Spears. Britney, who's now... What's going on with her Instagram?
Can we talk about Britney? Well, I think a lot of fans, myself included, have been worried about Britney over the past few months because you go on her Instagram, all you see Britney is in barely any clothes, performing, spinning around, and it's been a quite cause for concern. There was this big whole Free Britney movement, but now that she's actually been free, I think people are actually worried about her mental health. So she deleted her Instagram account, and so her fans were like, where Britney? So all these people started phoning the police to do a welfare check on Britney to see if she's OK. The police did go to her house, and it forced her to release a statement yesterday to say she feels like she's being gaslit, bit bullied. She says that she thinks her fans are going a bit too far and invading her privacy. But it is definite cause for concern if you follow Britney on Instagram and seeing the kind of posts she puts up there. I think there is concern for her mental health.
Oh. You do sort of think with some of these people, I wish they'd just quieten down.
Yeah.
You know, stay away from the limelight for a few months.
Yeah, but you can't win, as Britney has proved rightly so. She gets rid of the Instagram, and, you know, a lot of people find Instagram just trivial, a little thing there, but it's a way you stay in touch with your fans, and I think once you kind of delete that, your fans want more. They want to know what's going on, but I want to see Britney back on stage. I don't want to see her in a multi-million-pound house dancing around in knickers and bras.
No, thank you very much. No, we have our limits.
And I think her fans want to hear her singing.
Definitely. You've got a voice, use it.
Yeah.
What have you been up to this week, Stephanie? Because last time I saw you, you've been hanging about with Emma
Thompson. This week, has it been a quiet week for Showbiz? It has been a quiet week for Showbiz, actually. It's all systems go ahead of the BAFTAs and the Brits, so there's a lot of preparation for that. But January's always a quiet month in Showbiz, which I kind of like because it is the calm before the storm.
Gives you a little bit of a breather.
A definite breather. But I was hanging with Louis Theroux earlier this week. He's produced a documentary with this social media influencer called KSI. So he was just talking about why he's kind of getting involved with the younger generation and putting their stories to film, which was quite interesting, actually.
Social butterfly.
I love it. I wouldn't want anything else. I wouldn't want to do anything else.
Stephanie, thank you very much indeed.
When we come back, we're going to have all the details about Jeremy Hunt's new economic plans, and that's going to be just after your weather update.
Hello, very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGiven. A frosty and foggy start to the day for some of us, but actually it's going to turn out largely dry and bright across the UK. One exception, the far northwest, where this cold front will start to push outbreaks of rain and a freshening wind in later in the day. Otherwise, a ridge of high pressure extends across the country, leading to plenty of dry and bright weather. The best of any sunshine first thing through northern England, parts of West Wales, for example, and some areas of Scotland as well as Northern Ireland, although there'll also be some fog patches about. The most dense fog in Northern Ireland will tend to lift during the morning as cloud encroaches from the northwest, that cloud bringing some wind and rain to the Western Isles by the afternoon. But otherwise, for most, it's dry and bright. We'll have lost the showers that we saw yesterday in the east, and so sunny spells for England and Wales, southern and eastern Scotland, and typical temperatures 7 or 8 Celsius. Then, heading into Friday night, we keep the clear skies across much of England and Wales. Scotland and Northern Ireland will see a period of rain, but the rain tending to peter out as it pushes south. And by the end of the night, there's not much left. However, there will be an area of cloud, and that will keep things frost and fog free. Central Scotland still possibly getting down to 0 or just below. And for southern England, South Wales, that's where we'll see more extensive frost and fog patches, as low as -5 Celsius in some sheltered spots. But once the frost and fog clear, well, plenty of sunny spells for southern parts of the UK and brighter skies for Scotland and Northern Ireland, although a brisk breeze will bring some showers into the far north and northwest. And this area of cloud across central areas, Northern England, North Wales, the Midlands, will keep things fairly grey. 6 to 8 Celsius on Saturday, a bit milder in the north on Sunday, but also much windier with some wet weather pushing through Scotland and Northern Ireland.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back. The Chancellor is going to reveal his plans to pump up productivity and transform the British economy.
Good morning to you. It's 7 o'clock. It's Friday, the 27th of January, and this is Breakfast on GB News with Stephen and Angela. These are your top stories.
British genius and hard work are going to be at the centre of Jeremy Hunt's new economic growth policy. The Chancellor is set to unveil his plans at a major speech in London, where he will also make the case for further investment in British businesses by tearing away EU red tape.
11 people have died after further Russian missile strikes across Ukraine. The latest barrage of attacks follows the announcement of additional military support from the West, with Germany and the United States the latest to agree to send battle tanks to aid Ukrainian forces.
And new measures are being brought in requiring the public to show photographic ID when they vote. The updated regulations will be in place for this May's local elections. But do you think that this is the right way to protect our democracy?
Loads of you getting in touch on that. We're going to run through some of those in just a moment. If you want to get involved in our conversation, you know how to do it. GB Views at gbnews.uk.
Now, Jeremy Hunt is going to be using a major speech today to insist that he is serious about boosting economic growth in the UK, as he outlines proposals to unlock £100 billion worth of investment.
Now, the Chancellor plans to focus on key growth industries like digital technology, advanced manufacturing and creative industries. And he's also going to set out a long-term plan to tackle poor productivity.
And Mr Hunt will suggest that a wider bonfire of EU rules will be needed as ministers push ahead with plans to review all EU laws that are still on the UK statute book this year.
Well, let's talk to political commentator Peter Spence, who's here in the studio with us this morning. Peter, good to see you, as always. Look, what are we to make of this? Because it sounds great on the surface. Is there anything when you dig underneath?
Not as much as it might appear. I mean, I have to say I'm slightly reminded of Boris Johnson's boosterism. It's all going to be fantastic and world-beating. But is it? And, I mean, there are a few things that the specific items that he has in mind, but one of which is the bonfire of EU regulations, which anybody in the civil service would tell you is a great deal easier said than done. And I also note that there's another government department is looking at the potential for allowing students, overseas students, to work longer hours to plug those huge gaps in the labour force. There's over 1 million job vacancies kicking around just now, notably in hospitality and retail. But this, of course, will doubtless stick in the craw of the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. But it is still part of that Brexit legacy, which has left us with these gaps in the jobs market, and which urgently need filling because someone's got to do these jobs if they're going to boost productivity, for them's sake.
The trouble is, when you think about it, you couldn't go into a restaurant without hearing a French and Italian or a European accent of some description, because they were the people filling those jobs. Peter, is the elephant in the room here Brexit and the fact that we have not achieved all of the things that were promised to us when we came out of the European Union?
What do you mean, all of the things?
Many of the things.
Yeah. 6 years down the line, absolutely right, and there is very, very clear evidence of great swathes of buyer's remorse. All the polls tell us the same story, and not surprisingly, when all the official statisticians, as well as top economists, all say, look, it's not so much Brexit itself, it's the terms of the Brexit which have done serious damage to the British economy. And then if you trace back, Boris Johnson went for the hard Brexit rather than Theresa May's rather softer one as a way of shafting her. And now the chickens are coming home to roost.
It's interesting, though, because, I mean, this £100 billion of investment, releasing this investment that he's talking about, now that is going to be down to burning some EU red tape, isn't it? The lawyers say, I heard a lawyer on the radio a few months ago saying, actually, you could any competent lawyer could do this in 6 months.
Well, that's one lawyer saying that. You ask anyone in the civil service, and I quite to quote myself, it adds spice to my conversation, but anyone in the civil service will tell you, look, you're looking at a huge quantity, and the danger is if you just sort of just slash them all, that babies are going to get flushed out with the bathwater.
Yeah. Apart from that 100 billion, though, Peter, where is the money coming from to pay for all of this? I mean, I'm just looking again at one of the other quotes that he's talking about. He's talking about tight spending because he needs to resist union calls because that could fuel price increases, and that the battle against inflation comes first before tax cuts. So if he is going to do all of this to, kickstart the British economy, it's got to be paid for. We haven't got any money in the bank, have we?
No, we haven't, and we've got less money than we thought we had. The Office for National Responsibility made that quite clear a couple of days ago. And, I am reminded of that wonderful line in the movie Shakespeare in Love when the theatre director said, well, how are you actually going to make this work? And he said, it's a mystery. It's a mystery.
Yes, this is the problem with all of this. Do we think we're being touted something which is actually a long way down the line? We need to start growing the economy, I mean, quickly in some respects, but politically, they just need things to be up and running by spring next year, don't they, when we're likely to have a general election?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that is that they're against a very tight time frame here. And, there is a sense of whistling in the wind here, sort of, please, God, something is going to come right. I mean, the one thing they have got in their favour is that it is expected that inflation will drop down to low single figures by the end of the year. That will help. It might also mitigate against the damage being done to the economy by the swathe of strikes that we're looking at present. And it's sort of fallen off the headlines, but the fact is, in a few days' time, we've got something approaching a general strike coming our way.
Yes. We have to leave it there, I think, but we have to comment, I think, don't we, Stephen, on that amazing brooch that you're wearing.
Yes, very nice, Peter.
It is rather splendid.
Thank you so much. I'd like to say I got it at Bonham's, but alternatively, it might just have been a charity shop.
Oh, well, there you go. Your secret's safe with us, Peter. Good to see you. It is 7 minutes past 7. Let's bring you up to date with some of the other key stories today.
A former soldier found guilty of killing a man at an army checkpoint in Northern Ireland more than 30 years ago is going to be sentenced today. David Holden was convicted in November back in 1988. He was the first veteran to be found guilty of an historical offence since the Good Friday Agreement.
It's thought 31 million people were affected by postal delays over Christmas. Citizens Advice says the Royal Mail let down consumers for a third year running. More than 2 million people say they missed a health appointment because of the delays. 3 million said they failed to get important documents.
The government has refused to confirm that HS2 will reach its central London terminus. This follows reports in The Sun that claim that the rail project may not run to Euston Station until 2038, or that the London leg may actually be scrapped entirely due to inflation. The Department of Transport says the government remains committed to delivering HS2 to Manchester.
And the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, was paid, we now know, £320,000 to appear on I'm a Celebrity. It's been listed on the MP's Register of Financial Interests. He had the Conservative whip removed while he took part in the show because Parliament was sitting. More than 1,000 complaints were made to Ofcom, the broadcasting watchdog. We were talking earlier on about postmen or post ladies, weren't we? And why do they always wear shorts?
Well, I said, my postman, he wears shorts all the way through the winter. And I said, I always say to him, aren't you freezing cold? And he says, no. But Rob says, who is a postman, says, we wear shorts because if it rains and our trousers get wet, we have to walk around with cold, wet legs all day. But with shorts, once the rain stops, our shorts dry pretty quickly. And once we get used to it, our legs don't get cold. So there we are. That's the answer to that.
That makes sense, doesn't it?
I still think they get shivery knees, but well.
Long socks, knee socks. That's what you need. On identity cards and voting, they're bringing this new regulation now. You've got to have photo ID to go and vote. I said everyone getting in touch so far is in favour of it. I've got to mention Ken because he's in Barrow-in-Furness, where I'm from. Morning to you, Ken. He says, I'm a great enthusiast of identity cards. They should be compulsory and a general ID card introduced to combat illegal entry and voter fraud. I was a veteran and had one for many years.
Yeah, we're a bit further away from where you were born. Derek in Singapore, who's watching us, says, we have them here in Singapore and they're a boom in dealing with all sorts of regular dealings with the government, medical and certain other institutions. And we've actually also got someone who's watching us in the North Island of New Zealand whilst on holiday, touring in our motorhome. He says, thanks for keeping us up to date with news back home. And that's Tony from Storrington.
Oh, Tony. Well, I would say our pleasure,
worldwide.
Tony, but you're having too much fun out there on the North Island. How lovely. Send us a picture. Now, the war in Ukraine continues to escalate after the US and Germany agreed to deliver tanks to Kyiv.
The state's emergency service says 11 people have been killed and 11 others wounded in a wave of Russian missile attacks across Ukraine yesterday.
Well, let's talk to Chris Pleasance, Global Affairs and Specialist Reporter who joins us now. Chris, really good to see you. We are seeing a response, aren't we, from Russia? I'm clearly very unhappy with what's been agreed in terms of supplying tanks from the UK, the United States and Germany.
Yeah, so over the last 24 hours, as you say, we've seen a series of missile strikes across the country. It has to be said, not all that different from the kind of strikes that Russia's been carrying out for several weeks and months now. Putin has made some very angry comments. I believe his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, has also said that Russia is now basically in a war with NATO. So we've seen a ramping up of the rhetoric, but not necessarily anything new or significant on the ground as yet.
But in a way, he's right, isn't he? Because we do have, effectively, a proxy war being fought by the Ukrainians. They are fighting on the ground. They are the ones who are dying in the country. They are fighting with NATO weapons and on behalf of NATO countries who themselves admit that if, in fact, Putin wins this war, it does put other countries in Europe at real risk. I think Finland, Poland, Germany itself, all very anxious because they all have borders with this part of the world.
So I think it's very important to get the language right here. Certainly, Ukraine is in a war with Russia, and certainly NATO countries are supplying NATO standard weaponry to Ukraine. But the leader of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, has been very clear from the start that NATO will not engage in direct confrontation with Russia. Biden, when he agreed to give American tanks to Ukraine, made it very clear that they cannot be used for direct attacks against Russia. That has been the proviso of all of the weapons that have been sent so far, such as the HIMARS, and I imagine it will be the proviso of all of the weapons yet to come. So whilst, yes, NATO is supplying arms to a war being fought against Russia, I think it would be wrong to call this a proxy war between NATO and Russia.
Is it fair to say that there is, in many respects, a bit of a stalemate at the moment between these two sides, which raises fears. We've talked about it for months now, but the prospect of Russia taking much stronger, decisive action to try to bring this to some sort of conclusion. Is that a real concern now from strategists?
So, yeah, you're completely right to say that since Ukraine recaptured the city of Kherson late last year, the front line has been more or less stationary. Russia has made some gains in recent weeks that it's trumpeted as big victories, but really they don't move the front line any more than a few miles. We know that Russia is keeping about 100,000 or 150,000 men of the 300,000 it mobilized last year in reserve. We think they are being built up into a new attacking force that will be used for a spring offensive to try and break the deadlock. Ukraine is doing something similar. We don't know the numbers of troops that it has, but that is why the calls for tanks were going out now and other heavy offensive weaponry. The West has also agreed to send infantry fighting vehicles and other armoured attack vehicles, because what Ukraine is going to try and do is a similar thing. So once winter is over, once conditions on the ground have improved somewhat, Ukraine is going to use these tanks and these improved Western weapons to try and punch through the Russian lines and bring the war to some kind of conclusion. In terms of the fear of what Russia might do next, I think the fear now is a lot less than it used to be, actually, because Putin used a lot of his best units in the early weeks of the war. We think that up to 180, 200,000 Russian soldiers are now either dead or wounded. That is the invasion force he started with, plus a little bit extra. Not to mention all of the tanks and armoured vehicles and jets and so on that he's lost. So whilst we are anticipating Russia escalating the fighting in the sense that they're about to throw a bunch more men in, they are likely to be poorly trained, poorly equipped, and a lot less threatening than the force he started the war with.
And yet we are still in what Stephen has described as a stalemate. So where do you see the war going over the next few months? Because a lot of the armaments that we're talking about from NATO countries are not going to be at front line before the end of the year, or certainly well into this year. So how is this war going to progress now? Is it going to continue with this stalemate, do you think? Or are the people in the country actually in a position where they can start to make serious gains against the Russians?
So for the next couple of months, I would have thought until mid to late March, a stalemate is what we can expect to see continuing. I think what the Ukrainians will probably do is wait for Russia to commit its armies, try and weather that storm as best as they can. And then once the Russians have worn themselves out, will then seek to launch their counterpunch. The Western weapons we're talking about with the tanks, I actually think the Leopard tanks that Germany gave permission for earlier in the week are actually due to be in Ukraine within weeks rather than months. The British Challenger tanks, I think we're talking about the end of March. The US Abrams tanks will take slightly longer. They can be expected, I think, by the end of year, beginning of next. So in terms of what happens in the coming weeks, probably not very much. But come mid to the end of March, I think we could see things really start to ramp up again.
OK. Chris Pleasant, it's really good to talk to you this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much to you both.
Now, the Electoral Commission and councils across the country are urging people to make sure that you are prepared for the elections in May.
That's because for the first time in Great Britain, voters in all elections in England and some elections in Scotland and Wales will have to show a photo ID at their polling station to get their ballot.
Well, Jack Carson has been looking into the change.
In this year's local elections, history will be made. It will be the first time that voters in Great Britain will have to show a photo ID in order to get their ballot. It's not new to the UK, with Northern Ireland having the rule in place since 2002, but for voters in Britain, the change came as part of the 2022 Elections Act. There was opposition that it might disenfranchise voters, but the passing of the bill into law in April of last year means the electorate is now being asked to make sure it's prepared for this summer. Craig Westwood from the Electoral Commission explains what will be new for voters when they head to the polls for the local elections.
After each set of elections, there are a lot of people that do feel concerned that you can go into a polling station and get a ballot paper without having to demonstrate and confirm who you are. So there won't be that much difference. So you will go in and you will find a desk of a presiding officer and their team in front of you. They will ask for your name and address, check it off on the electoral register, as is normally the practice. But then there'll be an additional step of them asking to see your photo ID. There are lots of different types of ID which are eligible. They'll check that ID, and then once it's confirmed, they'll give you your ballot paper.
Not everyone is pleased the introduction of voter ID is here. Dr. Jess Garland from the Electoral Reform Society still has concerns about its practicality.
The government's asking voters to bring photographic ID. It's a type of ID that we know from the government's own research that over 2 million, about 4% of people don't actually have. And we know that it's also not equally spread across society. So if you're unemployed, if you're older, if you have a disability, you're much less likely to have the sort of ID that the government's asking you to provide in order to vote. And so clearly that is taking a huge risk with the next election. What we don't want to see is people being turned away from the polling station just because they don't have the right papers.
The Electoral Commission report on electoral fraud in 2014 found no evidence of systematic polling station fraud, but warned that polling stations remain vulnerable because of the few checks in place to check identity. Obtaining the most common forms of photo ID, such as a passport or driving licence, involves a fee, but the Electoral Commission stress a free voter authority certificate will ensure no member of the electorate is left out.
It is right that if people don't have eligible ID, including the free ID that's available, they will not be able to vote on polling day. But there are some other groups, such as the over 85s, who have lower levels of ID ownership. For them and for all other people who don't have ID, as you say, the voter authority certificate is there, and that is a free backup so that anybody who doesn't have ID can still make sure they get to vote on polling day.
The full list of accepted forms of ID is available on the government website, so people can be sure they're not caught out at the polling station from this summer onwards. Jack Carson, GB News.
When you look at the list of actually what you need,
There's
what you can
21
use,
of them, isn't there?
Yeah, and loads of stuff. I mean, things like a blue badge if you're disabled, any sort of bus pass, an Oyster 60+ card, Freedom Pass if you're young, proof of age standard scheme card. You know, the ones you use so you can get a drink in the pub. All of those will work. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
Quite
But we've had a lot of reaction to the story already, haven't we, Stephen? Because we read out some of the comments before. Not everybody actually is in favour. I have to say, Margaret in Yorkshire says, so you can come across the channel and enter the UK with no ID, but then you need one to vote in elections. And Paul says, I don't have any photo ID. I've never driven a car or a motorbike. The last time I had a foreign holiday was in 2001. I thought I was doing something to help the climate. Now it turns out that by doing this, it makes it more difficult for me to get a vote. But Paul, as we said, there are all sorts of ways in which you can get photo identity.
Yes, lots and lots, and including that free one. If you have nothing else, you can get a free one specifically to allow you to vote.
Yeah.
Janice says, I don't object to photo ID. I would like to see it compulsory to show you to get your ballot card at the voting centre. That would stop anyone voting twice.
Yeah, and
that's what it's all about, really.
And Rick says, those who oppose photo ID usually have a very good reason. They've probably got something to hide.
Ooh.
Probably that it was, like so many of our passport photographs, actually not a very good picture.
Well, it could well be it. Interesting one from Denise, though. How would it work with postal votes?
Yeah.
Which is a very good point.
Well, with postal votes, it's rather different because of the way they come to you through. I always have a postal vote because
do
I
you?
never know where I'm going to be when there's an election. I may not actually be at home. I may be away on a story somewhere. So I've had one for years, and I think that there's quite a lot of, quite a few sort of checks and balances you have to go through before you use your postal vote.
Right. So it's coming to your door.
It's coming to your door.
Yeah.
Yes.
There you go. Oh, well, keep your thoughts coming through. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Don't go anywhere, because we've got all the biggest sports stories with Aidan in a couple of minutes.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this
you
morning.
even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
26 minutes past 7. Welcome back. You are watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Angela.
And we're joined by Aidan McGee, who's going to take us through all the big sports stories this weekend. Good to see you, Aidan.
Good to see you too. Good to be with you.
Should we start off with a bit of football, should we? Man City versus Arsenal?
Yeah, big game tonight. I mean, it's an FA Cup match, but many people are speculating that it could have a bearing on the title race because those two are the top 2 teams at the moment. Well, not really. I mean, Arsenal are 5 points clear. Newcastle are in the conversation, Man United even, but a lot of people just think eventually it's going to be whittled down to Arsenal and Man City. Now, tonight is a chance for Manchester City to strike a psychological blow. Now, Arsenal have a choice. They haven't got the resources in terms of the squad that Manchester City have. They haven't lavished the kind of sums that City have over the last 5 years or so. So, I said this last week, I think Arsenal have got to get out of the FA Cup. I really do, because that just adds to your schedule. They're not in a position where they can just fight on all fronts, because they've not won the Premier League title in 19 years. They won the FA Cup several times. I think they've won the FA Cup more than anybody else in English football. So I think they can sacrifice that one. And I think it'd be foolhardy going into this game tonight away from home with a full squad, because if you go in with a full squad and you lose, well, if you're going to lose, I'd rather lose to the second string, because it leaves you in a psychologically better state of mind for when they play each other in a couple of weeks' time. They've got to play each other in the league twice as well. The interesting subplot to this is that Mikel Arteta, the Arsenal manager, learned his trade really under Pep Guardiola at Manchester City, and left there 3 years ago. And he said that Pep Guardiola said that Mikel Arteta had been a great and massive influence on him. He learned to manage in a different way, even though this guy was only his number 2. So he's gone to Arsenal. He was going to get... This time last year, they didn't win a game in January. And there was talk of him going. And now he's really turned it around, not by lavishing huge sums of money, but by improving players on the pitch and getting more out of players and moving on troublesome players. So let's see what happens tonight. But I don't think, given that the prize money for winning the FA Cup is £3.4 million, Arsenal probably make Arsenal probably make more than that on their match day revenue. So I think it'd be silly to stay in that competition when you've got this wonderful chance to win the Premier League.
And they've got all that silverware already. They don't need another cup. They've got enough.
Cup, yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about what's happening down under in Australia overnight, because we've got coming up now to very close to the final of the Open Championship in Australia for tennis.
Exactly. Well, Stefanos Tsitsipas has just won his 10th match of January, so that he's through to the final now. He'll be waiting for either Tommy Paul or Novak Djokovic. Djokovic has courted some controversy, or at least his father has in recent days. His father, Serjan, was pictured alongside some Vladimir Putin supporters, pro-Russia supporters.
He was carrying a flag, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. Well, they're meant to be banned. They're meant to be banned from the tournament. And again, football sport doesn't help itself by when it entwines itself with politics. Then sooner or later it finds itself in a difficult position. It has banned Russian flags, Belarusian flags. This time last year it was banning Russian players and Belarusian players, which I thought was hugely unfair, Angela, because I think that as if Vladimir Putin cares whether Daniil Medvedev goes to the final wins the Australian Open or not. I'd be surprised if he even knew who he was. And yet individuals are being punished. And I don't think players in tennis necessarily. We don't think of Roger Federer as being a representative of Switzerland. We think he represents
tennis.
Roger Federer, exactly. Although Andy Murray, we do say Britain, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
That's different.
When he doesn't, they call him Scottish.
Exactly.
Very briefly, it's going to be an exciting final, because I think you're going to have Tsitsipas, and it looks as if you're going to have Djokovic.
Exactly. I think Djokovic is hungry after what happened last year, and I think he's going to be unstoppable. Having said that, I wouldn't like to be facing somebody who has such form behind him. Tsitsipas, 10 in a row, terrific form, and he hasn't won a slam just yet. He's got something to prove.
And he could end up #1 in the world if he wins it.
Yeah, he could. Also, he would level himself 22-all with Grand Slams with Rafa Nadal.
Yeah.
Look at you two tennis fans.
So we're playing tennis. You're the net, aren't you? We're hitting the ball.
Hang on. Everybody else around here likes football. I'm just bringing a bit of balance to the sport.
Quite right too. Aidan, thank you very much.
See you tomorrow.
Thanks a lot, Aidan. Now, Labour is leading new calls for NHS reform as new figures show that thousands are waiting over 9 minutes for their 999 call to be answered.
Well, let's talk to the Shadow Minister for Public Health, Andrew Gwynn, who joins us now. Mr Gwynn, very good morning to you. Nice to see you. So what does Labour want to do? What are the key measures that you think could change all of this?
So, look, what we are witnessing is a real knock-on effect because of delays in emergency care, from increased pressures on call handlers right the way through to ambulance crews. And this is a consequence of 13 years of Tory mismanagement and neglect of our NHS. We need to basically fix the entire system, and the challenge is going to be huge. So primary care is an issue. We've got to reform primary care so that people don't get frustrated that they can't see a GP and go to A&E when they don't need to go to A&E. So that's part of the solution, to reform primary care. It's also about fixing the pathway through hospital, and more importantly, the gateway out of hospital through social care reforms. And when you start to do that, you unpick some of the problems. The biggest problem is that our staff are doing brilliant work in the NHS, but there are massive recruitment and retention issues. The staff that are in the NHS are under enormous pressure. They're doing more with less, and they're working longer hours. So what we would propose is the largest workforce expansion in the NHS's history, recruiting those doctors, those nurses, those care workers and those midwives for the future. And that's the only way we're going to resolve some of these key issues, and it's going to take reform.
But, Mr Gwynn, you will know as well as I do that it doesn't matter how many of the 10,000 new nurses that you want going through the system. It's going to take them 3 years to be trained. So this is not a short-term fix. You're not going to be able to do anything to change the NHS just by bringing in more nurses for at least another 3 years when they come out of their training.
It's not a quick fix, but the problem that we've seen over too long, to be fair, is that we approach the NHS each winter, there's a problem, we get a sticking plaster, we fix it. But what we don't fix are the long-term problems that are in the NHS. And we know what those problems are, and we know what the solutions are. So yes, you have to have short-term strategies, like the government's announced, for the immediate problems. But we've also got to address the long term, and we can't do that without reform. With the investment has to come the reform. Otherwise, the NHS just swallows up ever more resource. We can do this, Angela. You know, it's easy to just think this system is too big, the problems are too great, you can't fix it. But the point is, we did fix it. The NHS was on its knees in 1997. I'd argue it's worse today than it was then, but there were huge problems in the NHS in 1997. Yet by 2010, we gave to the incoming Conservative-led coalition a golden inheritance of the lowest waiting times, the lowest waiting lists, the highest patient satisfaction, and the NHS was independently judged by the Commonwealth Fund as one of the best healthcare systems in the world. It was ranked at number 2. That is something we achieved in the past through reform, through investment, and it's something that will fall to the next Labour government to do the same, to save and rebuild our NHS.
Talking about looking to the future, what do you make of what the Chancellor's going to say today? I mean, it's all over the papers. All the details are out. You know, burning EU red tape to unlock investment of up to £100 billion to grow the economy. I mean, these are the sort of messages we need, aren't they?
Well, they're the messages we need, but, Stephen, they're the messages we've had for the last 13 years. If I had £1 for every time the government have said we need to cut red tape, we need to invest in regions, we need to level up, we need to grow the economy, we need more growth, we need better productivity, I'd be able to pay the tax bill of Nadeem Zahawi. You know, I don't want words, I want action. And quite frankly, I've been sick and tired of hearing the same messages over 13 years. This government can't deliver on the economy and it can't deliver on public services. The problem is the government, and we need a new one.
You brought up the name Nadeem Zahawi. What do you make of the current situation? Should he stay? Should he go? Should he be sacked? Should he resign?
Look, I think, Angela, his position is completely untenable. To most people in the real world, you know, we're gutted if we fill in our self-assessment form and we get that letter back from the HMRC and they say we owe them 50 quid and we pay the 50 quid. It is incomprehensible that you could have to owe the HMRC a 7-figure sum, many millions of pounds. And in what world do you try not to pay it? You know, it's not just one rule for them, it's another world for them. And that's why I think, you know, somebody who holds one of the senior positions in Cabinet as Tory party chair, who's held one of the highest offices of state as Chancellor of the Exchequer, responsible for tax policy, responsible for people paying their money on time to the government, I think his position is untenable, and quite frankly, he shouldn't have hung on for as long as he has so far. He should just do the right thing and go.
We're very nearly out of time. Can I just quickly ask you about HS2? Because this actually is not a party political issue, because it's going, if you win the next election, it's going to fall under your remit, isn't it? The government refusing now to confirm that HS2 is going to carry on to its London terminal. And even if it does, it might be 2038. Now, what do we do about all of this? Would Labour want to scrap the system or what? What happens?
Well, look, this is a huge infrastructure project. It's one that is going to cost an awful lot of money. And if you've made the decision to build it, and you've started to spend many billions of pounds building it, and you get it to Birmingham, and you get it to Manchester, I quite frankly think you should finish the job and take it all the way to London. Because if you don't do that, what does that actually say about the communities that were supposed to benefit from HS2? What it says is you can now get a fast train to the edge of London. Well, where's the benefit of that? You know, if you're going to build it and you're going to spend this huge amount of money, do it properly and go all the way to the capital.
Mr. Gwynne, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let us know what you think about that. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Interesting.
Yeah.
Look, don't go anywhere. We've got all the big stories from the papers with Liz Kershaw and Benedict Spence in a couple of minutes.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It is 7:42. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Angela.
Let's take a look at today's front pages. In the Mail today, Jeremy Hunt says it's time to stop talking Britain down, as he's going to set out his plans for growth.
The Telegraph says Nicola Sturgeon's trans law is in disarray after she was forced to announce that a prisoner, Isla Bryson, who's just been convicted of rape, will have to stay in a male prison.
The Mirror leads with legendary singer Sir Rod Stewart, who's launched an attack on the Tories over their handling of the NHS.
The Guardian says Windrush campaigners have described the government's decision to drop crucial reform commitments as a slap in the face.
Well, it's time to go through the papers now, and joining us this morning is senior reporter from the newspaper, Benjamin. Benjamin.
It's Benedict Spence.
Benedict Spence.
And I work at the Eye now.
Well, we're very grateful to you, Benedict, because I know you jumped in at last minute because Benjamin's off sick.
I know, I'm being mean.
Commentator, Benedict Spence, I apologise.
You could be on the Eye.
I could be Benjamin if you want. I can do it. I'm not sure how good my impression is.
Short as well, of course. OK.
It's definitely you, is it, Lee?
It is definitely you.
So,
oh, good.
Yeah, still a bit early.
Let's start with you in the Times, should we?
Yeah, this is the PM's cunning plan to fill job vacancies and increase growth and productivity, was we were discussing earlier. Now, did you have when you were a student?
Yes.
In Nottingham.
Yeah.
Did you have a job on the side?
I did. I worked at Trent FM, the local radio
right.
station.
So it was kind of vocational. You were getting work.
50 quid a day I got.
I worked in a cafe, a restaurant on a Friday night, and I remember I got paid 63 pence an hour. And in the holidays, I worked in a frozen food factory in Leeds for a similar fee.
When I was still at school, because I didn't go to uni, but when I was still at school, I had a Saturday job in a company that was called Timothy Whites and Taylors.
Oh, yeah.
It is no longer. Yeah. And for a whole day's work, I got paid 10 shillings and sixpence.
If you tell us the kids this today.
50p, in other words.
I used to work night shifts at a print works, if that's what we're doing. I used to earn £12 an hour. Yeah, doing the overnight.
£12 an hour?
£12 an hour, overnight shift. Yeah.
That's more than Amazon workers.
You work from you'd work from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. and you'd get an absolute fortune because working in a print works overnight is a horrible, horrible job.
Right. Well, this is a way to fill all the vacancies they've decided. Students can shore up the hospitality and retail sectors, but not just students, foreign students. So at the moment, I wasn't aware of this, that if you're a foreign student, and there are 680,000 overseas students, you're limited to 20 hours of paid work a week. But if you're seriously studying...
Well, that's enough, isn't it?
That's enough, but they're saying they're going to put it up to 30 hours. It's what a ridiculous proposition. Can you imagine? So,
but why aren't British students or people, if there's a million vacancies, why and people are looking for work?
Exactly. Now, my experience of foreign students was when my son was at Warwick University, and his now wife, her dad wanted to do an MA course after she got a degree, and it cost £29,000 for 12 months, and she was the only person on the course because of the scale of the fees. They were foreign students. They're not poor people. The families who are sending somebody from China at £29,000 are they're not going to be struggling to pay the bill, and I can't see these people working 30 hours a week to shore up the British economy. I mean, I've spoken to somebody who works here, because we've chatted before, and he did work experience like you in radio, like internships, and so people are prepared to do that to enhance the prospects of getting a work visa after they graduate in the UK, and that's great because then they can enhance the British economy. But the idea that they're going to be the salvation of this country by coming over here to do a master's degree at Warwick Business School for £29,000 and then be flipping burgers in McDonald's. Can we come up with something better, please? Can I just say quickly that 30 years ago, after my eldest child had been born, and I did interview David Mellor at the time, but I remember asking somebody in government, Conservative, I've said, I've got a genuine question. I've just had a child. Please, can you tell me, say in 30 years' time, what will be the prospects for him in Britain? Oh, what do you mean? I said, well, we can't go out anymore into the world, clubbing people over the head and stealing all the natural resources and bringing them back here and converting them into manufactured goods. What are we going to do in the future to pay our way in the world and create wealth? I didn't get an answer then.
And you probably won't get one now. Benedict, we've got to ask you, you've been looking in The Guardian at PPE.
Yes, on the subject of not having enough money, it turns out that the government has it's written off $15 billion in COVID vaccines and medicines and PPE that is unusable and that isn't needed anymore, stuff that's gone out of date, stuff that simply wasn't required in the first place. And a lot of this came because it was you were paying a premium for it at the height of the pandemic. Everybody remembers this, that there was a shortage because most of it was produced in Wuhan, so everybody was sort of scrambling around to pay as much as they could. And now as much as 3/4 of the value of a lot of this stuff has been wiped off of it, and we don't need it anyway. And it's a tricky one because the government is now burning some of it to produce electricity, and it's also auctioning some of it off. There is a particularly interesting thing here. You can buy it's all for sale on an auction site right now. 64,000 goggles in one lot. Would you like to know what the current bid for £260 £260.
Oh.
£260, 64,000 pairs of goggles.
There's got to be some money to be made there somewhere if you've got the storage space.
Somewhere.
Absolutely.
Sadly, we're out of time. We're overrunning a little bit this hour, but Liz and Benedict, we will catch up with you both a little bit later on.
Now, the Prince and Princess of Wales have been hands-on at a food bank close to their home on the Royal Windsor estate. They've been packing food parcels for those who are in need.
Now, it's understood their Royal Highnesses wanted to support those helping families struggling with the rising cost of living.
So our Royal reporter, Cameron Walker, has this from Windsor Food Share.
Windsor's known for 1,000 years of royal history, but less than 2 miles from the famous castle, some locals rely on donations to stop them going hungry. The Prince and Princess of Wales were keen to visit Windsor Food Share to help volunteers sort food parcels and learn about the support they provide. Sarah Kember, who manages the service, thinks the free time people give up to help others is invaluable.
I'm so lucky we have such an amazing bunch of volunteers willing to do stuff for us and come in and help. They do deliveries to people's homes, collect from supermarkets for us, and without them, it wouldn't be possible. Without donations we receive from the local community and the local supermarkets, again, just wouldn't be possible.
William and Catherine learnt how demand has soared due to the rising cost of living. Last year, Windsor Food Share helped feed over 7,000 residents. That's an 18% increase on the year before. Food parcels, which hold bread, eggs, fresh fruit and vegetables, are given to any local household where it's likely a lack of money means people go hungry. Toiletries and cleaning products are also given out each month. Windsor Christian Action, which runs the food bank at Dedworth Green Baptist Church, explains what a royal visit means for the community.
We thought it would be wonderful for them to come and see and have hands-on experience. Hugely encouraging for our volunteers, and also it raises the profile, and at a time when need is increasing and publicity is good.
The Prince and Princess of Wales live with their 3 children just a short drive from the Windsor Food Share on the private royal estate. It's understood Prince William and Princess Catherine were keen to support their neighbours, who are a lot less fortunate than themselves.
I'd love your ideas and thoughts about where we can make the biggest difference.
Next week, Princess Catherine is expected to launch a national campaign to help the youngest in society improve their futures. It's understood this is her legacy moment, improving children's lives for generations to come. Cameron Walker, GB News, Windsor.
Now, 9 out of 10 prospective adopters say the cost of living crisis is affecting their decisions about adoption. That's according to Adoption UK.
They've done a survey and the charity is calling for an urgent review in that survey of financial support for adopters and adoptees, and indeed for lifelong support for people who've been adopted.
Well, let's talk to Adoption UK's CEO, Emily Frith, who joins us now. It's really good to see you this morning.
Good morning.
I mean, clearly, this is an area that needs to be looked at in a very sensitive way and actually funded in a way which is going to be for the benefit of those people who have been adopted.
Yeah.
But we're in a time where we haven't got any money. I mean, this is the fundamental problem, isn't it?
But I think we have to think about how we're spending the money that we have. And if families adopt, then that's hopefully giving a child a lifelong sort of support, loving relationships. I think it's really important to not think about adoption as a sort of happy ending. It's really important that we support children throughout their lives and into adulthood, because adoption often follows really, really difficult starts in life, and children will need support in school and with their health as they grow up, and adopted adults need support too, because they need support with contact with birth family, and they need support with their mental health potentially as they go into adulthood. So it's really important to think about adoption as a kind of lifelong journey.
I was talking to friends of mine who are adopting a second child, and they're going for someone who is sort of 7 or 8 years old to join the son they have, who is now 10 or 11 years old, that they adopted as a baby. I mean, are you finding it more difficult to actually help families that take older children than when they take someone who is just a newborn practically, or someone who is just sort of a little toddler of 1 or 2 years old.
I think older children and sibling groups often wait longer to find an adoptive family, but it's amazing when they can find a family, but they do need that extra support because of the experiences they will have had as they grow up. They may have had to go through different foster carers. They will have had a lot more potential trauma in their early years. So it's really important that they get that health support and that support in school as they grow up, so they can have every chance to have a good future.
There may be people watching who say, why is lifelong support needed? I mean, certainly a couple I know who have adopted, they've got 2 children now, and they were both adopted when they were sort of, toddlers. Now, and they're being brought up in a wonderful, happy home. Are they likely to still need support when they get older? And is it all about coming to terms with actually where they are originally from?
I think the sort of impact adoption can change as someone gets older. So, when you go to the doctors, maybe even in your 50s, and you get asked about your sort of family history, of medical history, that can maybe trigger some feelings about, that where you come from, your background, your contact with family. So I think it's really important to think about adoption as a lifelong thing, and that we can provide support for people even into adulthood in their older years, because it may be that it takes a long time for these feelings to surface.
And some of the greatest emotional support is needed very often, I think, when families have been split up, haven't they? And it's very rare, I think, for you to get people who will adopt and take an entire family or 2 or 3 children. And those children then are separated. They've lost their parents, and they've lost now the siblings, the only people with whom they have any kind of emotional connection. So when they get older and they discover, in fact, that they probably have a brother or a sister somewhere, the emotional impact it must have on them of having been separated and perhaps only discovering when they're in their 20s that there is a sibling somewhere. That must be a huge problem for them.
Absolutely huge, and I think it's really important that we think about contact for adoptive families with birth relations, and think about that really carefully and provide the right support, especially with social media nowadays. Sometimes contact can come out of the blue, and I think we need to really support people as they grow up with that contact and try and keep siblings together when we can. But the cost of living crisis has an impact on that, because adopters might not be able to take more than 1 child, and it has an impact on travelling to see family as well, if people can't afford the petrol or the bus fare.
We're down to the last 30 seconds, I'm afraid, but are you seeing a sort of definite negative impact of the cost of living crisis in terms of people who are looking to adopt?
Yes, in terms of people looking to adopt, in terms of families who need that support for their children, and for adopted adults as well. So our survey found a negative impact on all 3.
Can you put a figure on how much you want?
Not an individual figure, because it's what's right for the child. That's what's most important, I think.
OK. Emily Frith from Adoption UK, really good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed, Emily.
Don't go anywhere. Top stories heading your way in just a moment.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store? You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous. Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
The Chancellor is set to reveal his plans to pump up productivity and transform the British economy.
Good morning. It's 8 o'clock on Friday, the 27th of January, and this is Breakfast on GB News with Stephen and Angela. And here are your top stories this morning.
British genius and hard work are going to be at the centre of Jeremy Hunt's new economic growth policy. The Chancellor set to unveil his plans at a speech in London today, where he'll also make the case for further investment in British business by tearing up EU red tape.
Rent prices outside of London have hit a record high as the average cost has now risen to over £1,100 a month. Those in the capital haven't escaped the problem, however, as their average rent has surpassed £3,000 per month for the first time in history.
And the Prince and Princess of Wales have been helping out at their local food bank in Windsor. The couple assisted volunteers sorting through donations and spoke to members of the community. We'll get the latest from our royal reporter.
And as ever, of course, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews at gbnews.uk.
So, in just over an hour, Jeremy Hunt will use a major speech to insist he is serious about boosting economic growth as he outlines proposals to unlock £100 billion of investment.
Now, the Chancellor plans to focus on key growth industries such as digital technology, advanced manufacturing and creative industries. And he's also going to set out a long-term plan to tackle poor productivity.
And Mr Hunt will suggest that a wider bonfire of EU rules will be needed as ministers push ahead with plans to review all EU laws still on the statute book this year. But let's talk to our political reporter Olivia Utley, who's outside Bloomberg's headquarters where that speech is going to take place very shortly. I mean, hard work and British genius. Sounds all well and good, Olivia, but doesn't give us much detail.
No, so
Jeremy Hunt will stand up and say that we can unleash Britain's genius, as you say, to drive those big sectors of growth. And he's saying that we don't need to talk Britain down, we can build our economy and turn it into something fantastic. Essentially, he's pushing a very positive spin on his real message, which is we can't afford to cut taxes. There are plenty of backbench Conservative MPs who are getting a bit fed up with Jeremy Hunt, who they see as a sort of undertaker figure who's always bringing bad news. And what they want is a Conservative government that's prepared to cut taxes. They think that's the only reason why people will go out and vote Conservative in the next election. Jeremy Hunt thinks that we just can't afford to do that right now, and we have to grow the economy before it's possible to cut taxes. So he's going to come out with this big speech with a big plan to tackle our massive productivity problem. But essentially what he'll be saying is, I'm sorry, I can't do what you want me to do.
What he's going to say today. Did you?
Sorry, I missed
you
that.
may not have heard me. I said, where is he going to get the money to finance all of this, or has he not put that into the speech today?
He hasn't yet given details of how the plan to level up Britain, level up that phrase again, is going to be financed. But we know that there are going to be no tax cuts further down the line. So what we're expecting is this trail for the budget to be, he probably won't mention it, but there will be stealth taxes. So we know, well, we expect that the rate that the income tax rate, the rate that you start paying income tax, will be frozen at, I think it's £12,500, which means, against a backdrop of very high inflation, that lots more people are going to be pulled into those higher tax brackets. So that does give the Treasury a little bit more room for manoeuvre. Of course, what Jeremy Hunt will argue is that in being responsible with the economy and not cutting taxes, he's restored faith in the markets from the position that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng left them. And that too has given Britain's economy a little bit of a boost. So that's what he'll argue. But yes, essentially it's going to be about those stealth taxes, he won't say that he's raising taxes, but that's what it'll be.
And we can hear what he's actually going to say, I think, at about 9:20, because he'll be carrying the speech live. Thanks very much, Olivia.
Yeah, well, does it all sound a bit like gobbledygook to you? It does to me. I find it very confusing. A man who can make sense of it all is former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, David Mellor. David, putting you on the spot. What does all this actually mean? Does it mean anything at all?
No, I think what it means is that the government doesn't want to tell the public what they're really doing. You see, I personally take the view that it would be better if the government was frank with people and actually said, look, we can't have tax cuts at the moment. The economy is in a mess. We're dragging it out of that mess, and here's how we're going to do it. I do not like a so-called tax-cutting government actually raising taxes by keeping thresholds at a fixed figure. So, in fact, what was worth 12,500 last year is not 12,500 this year. And, but I think generally, when you think of the way that the money was thrown around under Boris Johnson, who was a tax and tax and tax and spend and spend and spend, socialist chancellor really, and as Prime Minister, he put in that kind of regime. And I think what Jeremy Hunt is doing, who, after all, had never been at the Treasury, a very experienced minister, I think he's doing well because he's giving the impression he knows what he's doing, which, in this government is quite an achievement. And basically, I don't know that that there's very much he can do except batten down the hatches.
Mm. Oh.
Well, I think he is trying to make it clear that he's not going to be raising taxes. He's said that already.
But
he's
not
going to lower them.
He's raising taxes.
He's going to raise taxes.
He is raising taxes because
of the threshold.
Because of the thresholds, and that is, mind you, that's been tried before, mainly by Labour chancellors. But I suppose if there's a good idea around,
did it,
take
didn't
it.
he, under Thatcher? And he was proved, and at the time he was vilified for doing it. But later they said actually he'd done the right thing at the right time.
But Geoffrey Howe, who I worked with, I was his deputy at the Foreign Office and so on. Geoffrey Howe was a tough-minded man. He looked like, a sort of wombly figure. But in fact, and what he did was tell the public what was going on in a way that nobody these days has the courage to do. But what we need are a few more people like Mr. Alex Gurko. Have we?
We have.
Mr. Alex
Sunday
Gurko.
Times
He
list.
pays almost as much tax as you do.
Really?
500 million a year.
This is the Sunday Times rich list, which has been
the
released today, and they've also told us not only how much people earn, but how much they pay for tax.
Yes.
The gentleman in question is a Russian citizen who came here. He left Russia and he's joined us here in Britain, and he paid the equivalent of £487 million
Yes.
in tax in 12 months. It's the
And
equivalent
says he
of
doesn't
1.3
mind.
a day.
Yeah, he doesn't mind. He believes in wealth taxes.
Staggering.
But, you know, a brave man. He said to Putin, Nuremberg awaits, and has given up his Russian citizenship. So salutations to Alex Gurko, a brave and principled man.
Do we need to be a little bit careful? Because, I mean, the tax list is phenomenal. I mean, Tim Martin, J.D. Weatherspoon's people know him, £123.2 million in tax he's paid and all the rest of it. What we don't know with this is how much they were actually earning and what percentage of tax they're paying.
But I think what they're doing very well. I mean, there are a lot of people and a lot of... no, but I think they're doing very well to divvy up the amount that they're divvying up. I think what I dislike is, you know, you go into... a coffee shop, and you find that they're making a lot of money out of your buying your coffee, and very little of that is going to the UK Treasury. And I think that the failure to deal with companies and get them to pay proper tax is really where we've fallen down.
Is there a danger with... Because it's all about tying it all in with Jeremy Hunt, right? And it's all about growth. Now, if you get, and I don't know if it still applies, so forgive me, you know, but back in the day, it was all talk about Amazon and Starbucks.
Yes.
Now, whether the rules have changed for them or not, I don't know. But if the rules change, so they're paying more tax here, then presumably that's going to affect prices in the shops and all the rest of it, which then stops growth, doesn't it, or damages growth?
Well, no, I think with these retailers, I think an awful lot of them are taking advantage of lax tax rules here just in order to trouser more money. And in fact, one of the things they have to bear in mind is, are people willing to buy their product? Well, now they're obviously only willing to buy their product if the price is competitive. But you see, where we have a real problem here is the wasted time under Boris. Boris said, we're going to get Brexit done. Now, what Boris meant by getting Brexit done was you took a bill through Parliament. That is, you know, to be a bit Churchillian, not the end or even the beginning of the end, merely the end of the beginning, because what you then had to do is take all of these statutes that imposed various financial requirements from the EU and get rid of them. That has not happened, and as a consequence of that, you know, 3 years on, 4 years on, he's looking, Jeremy Hunt, to get money by actually removing some of the impositions that no longer apply because we're not in the EU, but they still are in British law.
David, we've got to leave it there, sadly.
No.
You've used up all your time.
No.
It's been a joy to see you.
So I
want I demand a recount.
So much more to say.
You can have one. Thanks, David.
But let's bring you up to date then with the latest headlines. An estimated 31 million people were affected by postal delays over Christmas. Citizens' Advice said the Royal Mail let down consumers for a third year running. More than 2 million people say they missed a health appointment due to the delays, whilst 3 million said they failed to receive important documents.
The government refused to confirm that HS2 will reach its central London terminus. Follows reports in The Sun that say the rail project may not run to Euston Station until 2038. That's 15 years away. Or that the London leg may be scrapped entirely. The Department for Transport says the government remains committed to delivering HS2 to Manchester.
King's College London has discovered a new test that could detect Alzheimer's disease years before a clinical diagnosis. The university collected blood samples from people with mild cognitive impairment, and the college found that the blood test can spot cognitive changes and predict the risk that Alzheimer's is going to occur 3.5 years before it's actually been diagnosed. I'm going to slap your hand.
My hands. Is it my hands? Is it my fault? Sorry. The former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, was paid £320,000 to appear on I'm a Celebrity. The fee's been listed on the MP's Register of Financial Interests. He had the Conservative whip suspended for taking part in the show while Parliament was sitting. And more than 1,000 complaints were made to Ofcom.
The average month...
I'm in so much trouble.
He's got control of the thing that...
the words. I'm doing the words this morning.
He's disappearing them, aren't they?
Sorry.
Not me, because I don't know how to use them.
I was just teeing up the next
You don't
story,
need to know that. You don't need to know that.
love
What you
it.
do need to know is that the average monthly rent, apparently being asked of new tenants outside of London, has hit a record £1,172 per month.
Ouch. The typical private rent being asked within London also hit a record high of, wait for it, £2,480 a month. That's according to Rightmove.
And Rightmove has also predicted that average asking rents across Britain for newly available properties is going to rise a further 5% in 2023, unless there is a significant addition of available homes to rent.
Let's talk to independent estate agent Jeremy Leaf, who's here. Jeremy,
Morning, Steve.
Can I just say, as someone who pays a mortgage, has done for a long time now, I am astounded at this, because if you're forking out that much in rent, how do you ever save up to buy a house?
Well, this is a problem, a big problem, particularly for young, aspiring first-time buyers trying to get onto the ladder. They're faced with higher rents, which is making saving even more difficult, that crucial deposit. So the prospect of home ownership disappears into the dim and distant future.
Why are they hitting these heights? Is it because, you know, we have to say this, is it because landlords are getting greedy and want more money? Or is it because there's actually a reduction in the amount of properties that are available?
It's a bit of everything. It's a bit of everything. But it's particularly, you've hit the nail on the head there, a lot of landlords are leaving the sector because of the rules and regulations, which is putting up costs, and they're finding it more difficult. And we need good landlords, because even the social housing, local authorities are depending on private landlords as well. Rents are going up, they're not happy, so they're leaving, and that's part of the problem.
So what do you get? I mean, presumably these sort of average figures, so 1,100 and whatever it was outside of London, £2,500 in London. What are people getting for that?
Well, they're not getting very much. The average, maybe a two-bedroom flat or a small three-bedroom house. In London, maybe only a one-bedroom flat, depending on where you are. But it's just getting increasingly difficult to find affordable properties. And in some cases, people are bidding over the rent. Even these are asking rents even more to get the properties. It has calmed down a bit because, of course, energy costs have gone up, living costs have gone up, so therefore people can't afford as much as they would like. But landlords' costs have gone up as well.
Is the answer that we've got to go back to building, again, council houses, that we actually need more social housing so that people are not put in the position where they have to go into the private sector?
There's not one solution, it's lots of solutions. There's too many empty properties. We just have to walk around here or any parts of London or anywhere in the country. There's too many empty properties. So looking at that, looking at a composite overall solution, trying to bring properties back into use, making it easier to convert properties into smaller.
When you talk about too many properties that are empty, we have to think about what's happened, of course, to an awful lot of businesses who no longer need the great sort of multi-storey blocks that they used to inhabit because so many people are now working from home or on a more temporary basis. I mean, what is the possibility of those being turned into properties?
Well, they are. The dynamic has changed, Angela, because working from home before during the beginning of the pandemic became more popular. Now there's a drift back into cities and towns so that people want to stay more in towns than they did before. So there's more demand. It's another factor behind the rents that Steve was talking about.
In terms of landlords, you say costs have gone up, right? Have the costs gone up enough to justify these sort of figures that we're seeing now, or are they just raking in more and more profit? They want to make a profit. Absolutely get that, but where does the responsibility lie to make sure you're just not pricing people or a section of society out of the market?
Well, I think landlords have a moral responsibility to look after their properties, provide good health properties which comply with health and safety and are energy efficient. That's the most important thing. And landlords are charging more sometimes when their own costs are going up. But 99% of the landlords we deal with want to have good tenants who stay a long time. They're not looking for the last penny.
Why is it, I wonder, that in countries like France, Germany, many European countries, everybody tends to rent rather... Well, not everybody, I mean, that's an over-exaggeration, but it tends to be more of a rental market than an ownership market. What are they doing that we're not?
It's just a different mindset. We've always had this thing, maybe because we live in a smaller place, we want to own our own property, and property values have gone up. People regard it as a way of feeling better about themselves. They spend more money in the shops and in the economy. A healthy property market is not just good for the industry, it's very, very good for the economy, and this has been proved time and time again here.
And the problem is, I suppose, that young people can't actually afford the deposit for a house anymore, can they? Never mind paying the mortgage,
we're back to the rents.
Compares.
We're back to the higher rents, which is making deposit saving even more difficult for those aspiring first-time buyers.
Yeah. Tough all around for people.
Not easy.
No.
Oh,
No.
Jeremy, thank you very much indeed.
very
If
much.
you're struggling with your rent, love to hear from you this morning. gbviews@gbnews.uk. I mean, I just think it's absolutely astronomical. You end up paying in those situations more for the rent than you would do for a mortgage.
Exactly, because you haven't been able to get the mortgage deposit in the first place. It's a vicious circle, isn't it? Downward spiral.
Yeah.
Well, after the break, we're going to be heading up to a very odd pub in the Peak District, where the only thing on tap is water.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already depressed.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind, and we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
8:22. Good morning to you. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Angela.
Now, it might be the first time that you've heard this, but there is a water bar in the Peak District.
Yes, the owner, Dorian Binder, is also known as the Bearded Water Sommelier. He has a mission of spreading the word about how the benefits of staying hydrated can change every aspect of life for the better.
And Dorian joins us now. A very good morning to you. Good
morning. How you doing? Hello, thank you for having me on.
Not at all.
We're absolutely intrigued. Yeah. So, first and foremost, your bar, do you sell anything other than water?
Yeah.
So if somebody comes in and has a meal with you...
We sell alcohol, we sell ale. Yeah, no, we do. But really, there are plenty of pubs in the country. There's no shortage of ale or lagers anywhere. But we are the healthiest pub in the land, and that is something to be really proud of, and raising awareness to the most important liquid on the planet, to human beings, which we don't really appreciate in this country, in my opinion.
No, but you've got a pub which is over a spring, haven't you, so you bottle your own water, and presumably that's some of it that we can see behind you. But what else have you got there?
So basically what happens is I discovered our source by complete accident. Before I discovered it, I thought water was water. I'd never heard there was a conversation to be had about water. So to me, this caught me by complete surprise. So the discovery of the water for me was in 2017. But since then, I realised very quickly I need to study, I need to learn, I need to understand what the differences are between tap water, natural water, mineral water, spring water, distilled water, purified water. We have all these waters and we give them one name, and they are not, they are all different. And for me now, my passion is sharing that information, making sure that people know what they are consuming, because there is no other liquid on the planet that compares to water, as we are human beings that are made of water. So the quality of the water is critical.
How are you getting that message across when people come into your pub and say, order a meal? Because you've got a restaurant there as well, I think. You serve food as well, don't you? I mean, what's the conversation you have with them? Do you ask them what wine they want with their meal and what water they want with their meal?
No, it doesn't really work like that anymore, Angela, because the pub was not sustainable. The pub was never sustainable, which is why the water has basically guaranteed the pub will have a future of some form in the future. But what I do here are water tastings, raising awareness. I do school visits and just really introducing to people, because as soon as you taste waters of different minerality and you understand now that they have a taste and they are different due to the minerality, it's an eye-opener. And why in the UK, if you're buying bottled water, natural and mineral and spring waters are the only waters you should be buying. If it's not natural, mineral, spring, sling it in the bin. That's the message. It's really important.
So, I mean, how different are these waters?
OK, so let's start. That's a brilliant question. Distilled water, H2O with no minerality, has a TDS reading of 0. TDS is the measurement of minerality, total dissolved solids. So, naturally occurring, I have a water here from Italy, a glacial water called Loredana, TDS 14. When you drink it, it's a clean, crisp, sharp taste. It almost evaporates in your mouth. And it also leaves your mouth feeling slightly dry and tacky. So that's 14 TDS. I go all the way up to 15,000 TDS, Donut MG. This is more of a health tonic. But just to give you a comparison, seawater is between 30 and 40,000 TDS. So natural waters that I have in my collection here range from 14 TDS to 15,000. How different are they? Black and white, chalk and cheese. There is no confusion between them at all.
What's the difference in the taste?
It's absolutely fascinating.
What's the difference in the taste? Because when I go into a restaurant these days and they say, would you like water? I mean, most people tend to say, yeah, tap water will do, thank you very much indeed. And because you're eating a meal which has therefore got all sorts of flavours and tastes to it, how are you going to tell the difference when you've got a glass of your very high, whatever it was, water?
Minerality. So basically what we're now introducing to the UK, and this is something that's going to become more and more common now, will be water menus. So matching food with water, contrasting food with water. Just to give you an idea, Vichy Catalan is one of the #1 selling waters in Spain, TDS 3052. When you eat cheese with Vichy Catalan, it is unbelievable. What does Vichy taste like? It's sweet, it's salty, it's complex, it's layered. It's absolutely fascinating. But the amazing thing about it is it's carbonated at the source. Naturally, it comes out of the ground sparkling, which is absolutely incredible. How does that compare, for instance, to Chateaudon 1650, which has been bottled at the source since 1650, was drunk by Roman soldiers for hundreds of years beforehand, because they knew these waters gave them incredible powers. So the power of water is a message that's been hidden on us, and it's something that needs to come to the front because it's the #1 important ingredient in the human body that's made of water.
You see, it's interesting you said that Vichy Catalan, I often get that when I'm in Spain, and it does taste delicious. It does taste, as you say, slightly almost sort of salty and slightly different. But how do we educate ourselves?
I call it savoury water. It's almost like a sausage roll. You drink it and you feel like you've eaten food because it fulfills with the flavour profile of the water. It's like eating a meal. It's incredible.
Wow.
And how are you getting that message across to the country at large, not just the community around your pub?
Yeah, so TikTok. TikTok's the platform, Bearded Water Sommelier on TikTok, and all I do is talk about water, the importance of water, and why that message really isn't at the forefront. So what's the difference between tap water that comes out of your tap at home that smells of chlorine and natural mineral and spring water? So tap water, for example, is different sources of water, different combinations of water. That water's then filtered. So you've got surface water, rainwater, borehole water, flush your toilet water. All of these waters are then filtered, and then they're blended with fluoride and chlorine to make sure the water is safe for consumption. So that's laboratory man-made water, which is why it smells of chlorine when it comes out of your tap at home. Natural mineral and spring water, authentic organic water is bottled at source, controlled by trading standards. Everybody needs to know, if you're buying bottled water, if it doesn't say natural mineral or spring, you sling it in the bin. It's really that simple, because it could be anything. So
We got the message loud and clear. I think you are so passionate about this.
Yeah, I'll be tempted to pop round and try the different things. It does sound interesting. Doran, really good to see you this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
More to come, including the biggest stories from the papers, alongside Liz Kershaw and Benedict Spence.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Angela and Stephen.
Let's go through the papers for you this morning with political commentator Benedict Spence and broadcaster Liz Kershaw. Good morning, you two. Let's start with EVs, electric vehicles, Liz, in the Mail.
Yeah, so I've read the most horrendous stories, as I'm sure many of our viewers and listeners did, over just after Christmas, where people had got an electric car and embarked on their first long journey home, whether it was to Scotland. There was one guy who set off down to Cornwall.
Oh, I read that.
And the range anxiety, he said he felt sick the whole way there and the whole way back, and the number of times he had to stop, and the range would tell him one figure and he'd see it tumbling before his eyes, and the queues for charges, etc. So interesting.
We'll get used to that, though, won't we?
Well, we shouldn't have... The aim is to have 300,000 charging points, public ones, in the country, and currently we're up to 30,000, which is 10%.
We haven't got the infrastructure, have we?
No,
it just isn't there.
The other thing is, and it's a real issue for me, because I've been looking to get a car that I feel safe and comfortable in, so I put it out on Twitter. Should I get petrol, diesel, hybrid or electric? Overwhelmingly, people said petrol, and this article is saying the electric car revolution is into reverse, and people are thinking again about it. I certainly am. I've researched it as well this week. For a start, you need electricity to charge the battery, and electricity has to be created and supplied by the national grid, and it can either be done disingenuously by importing frozen fracked gas from the United States, or burning coal, or burning wood that's been brought all the way from possibly the Amazon. It doesn't come from nowhere, so you're still reliant on fossil fuels. The second thing is the batteries and the earth metals that are required. I've become quite a scientist, and most of these are obtained in China, because that's where they lie in the ground. So not only are we at the behest of China, I was reading about the Chinese have also bought sites in Africa, and the environmental and human damage it does, open cast mining these really quite unstable elements, is appalling when you read about it. The local water supplies have become contaminated.
We've got to do it more carefully, but we are moving. I mean, this is the direction we're moving in, and we've got to embrace.
Currently, I think the point that Liz is making is that it's only affordable because it is effectively being done by a form of slave labour. These are people being paid children being paid subsistence wages, if that, in Africa, and not just in any old Africa. It tends to be places like the Congo. It's the worst part, the poorest places where there is the least sort of oversight. Somewhere else where it's starting to be done, hilariously, is Afghanistan, which has vast natural resources that we need for environmentals, and now just happens to be controlled by the Taliban. There are going to be very few qualms there about the rights of the people working.
But bringing it down to the people that are watching this programme, if they decide to buy an electric car, they have to think very seriously about where they're going to be able to charge it. If you live in a house that has a drive and you have access to an electric point, that's fine.
Yeah.
If you live in a flat, where I live, there are loads of flats.
Yeah, you'd have wires dangling from
wires
the window.
dangling from the window. You can't have... There are 3 charging points when there are well over 1,000 properties in the area. But it just isn't going to work.
But even if I could say, yeah, I've got somewhere I can park it off-road and plug it in, fine. I couldn't now, having read all this stuff and watched a report on a foreign news channel about it, and had my eyes opened. I couldn't sit smugly behind the wheel of an electric car and think, oh, I'm so virtuous, I'm doing my bit for the environment. Actually, I'm ruining landscapes in other continents and poisoning and killing people. A friend of mine, the son was
It's not that black and white, though.
A friend of mine's son did metallurgy at Bristol University and died at the age of 26. He went to work for a mining company in South Africa, Southern Africa, it wasn't South Africa, mining just these things, and died of the most horrible cancer. Could the two events be connected because it's local people?
It's not simple. You're absolutely right.
Something very quickly to add to that. You know, the last couple of months, the National Grid has been talking about rationing energy. It's been talking about blackouts and brownouts. How can you square that with telling people to cross over to electric vehicles?
Benedict, you have got a story there from the Times, haven't you?
Yes, and this is more good news, and that is that the people smuggling industry is going gangbusters and making record profits. 183 million is what is estimated that criminal gangs made from transporting just over 45,000 people across the English Channel in small boats. That is up from just 299 people in 2018. It is expected to be around 65,000 this coming year. Already over 1,000 have made the journey in the depths of winter in the freezing cold. And it is just, I think, a sign, really, that this is something that Rishi Sunak and his government, they've staked themselves very clearly in the sand, saying this is something that we're going to address. But all the independent experts say that this is something that's going to be very difficult to address, and it's going to cost an awful lot of money because, as you can see there, 183 million, there is vast financial incentive for the criminal gangs to keep this up and keep it going. The French authorities, according to the Times, stopped 31 crossings yesterday. They stopped 31 crossings. If they're doing that and it's still profitable and it's still incentivized, just imagine actually how much more money could be made and how much we are going to have to set aside in resources, not just us, the French as well. They're going to have to set that aside in resources to stop these things from very determined people, who are fleeing wherever they're fleeing, or in the case of the people from Albania coming for economic reasons, but also, deeply rooted, long-standing criminal organizations that crisscross around Europe and have their fingers in many pies, who are, let's be honest, the history of organized crime in Europe is not one of people who are not determined, to put it that way. It is going to continue this year unless an awful lot of resources are brought to bear against these criminal organisations.
The French are able to stop more boats.
Exactly.
Yes.
Liz, to the Sun, and they've made a lot of headlines with their HS2 investigation.
Yeah, I went on, I said this week I went on the Elizabeth line, which is Crossrail.
Is that Crossrail, Elizabeth line?
From London, from Reading to Abbey Wood or Stratford in the east. Absolutely superb. It's the future. But then I thought to myself, why don't we have something like this in the north where I'm heading today, and I'll be sitting in some clapped-out, dirty, filthy train, chugging along across the Pennines. What's happening to levelling up? So the Elizabeth line, it runs parallel and links up at nearly every station with the tube. It actually runs parallel with the Central line for quite a way. When you get to Docklands, it runs parallel with it runs alongside the Docklands Light Railway. So the South East got this, London got this. Then I thought, I wonder how long it is. So it's 65 miles long. How far's Liverpool Lime Street from Leeds City Station? 62 miles long. It would have been so much benefit levelling up the northwest.
Well,
and there's now been abandoned. Any hint of a fully electrified high-speed rail link between Liverpool, Leeds, and why not onto York and Hull seems to now have been shelved. Anyway,
but it's about the infrastructure, isn't it? I mean, how difficult it's going to be. I mean, going under London and all that, it's not that difficult because of the infrastructure that's already there.
There's a lot to avoid.
Well, there's a lot to avoid. You just go deeper. But it's presumably more problematic going Liverpool to Leeds.
Well, I don't think it needs to be underground. For one thing, there's a lot more open land. And secondly, the tunnels through the Pennines are already built. In fact, there's one that they bricked up that's no longer used. But there are at least 2 other routes that were in the Victorian era with navvies with shovels. They managed to bury it through rock and through the backbone of Britain. So I
think there's just a lack of desire, really. Actually, you look. I tell you what, you look from space at the map of the UK, and you look at Liverpool to Manchester, and then you've got the Pennines, but then it's Leeds and it's Bradford, and there's another large urban centre. There is huge potential there that just isn't being made the most of.
Can I just say there will be people in the West Country watching this program and saying, why are you talking about London, the South East and the North? How about giving us a decent railway system that goes from London all the way to Penzance? Because there's only one line and it takes 6 hours. So it's...
But isn't it interesting, though, that if they did Liverpool to Leeds, if they did London to Penzance, there would still be plenty of people up in arms saying, we don't want it.
I don't think you'll get too many of them down in the West Country.
Well, I think back to the peg for this, though, the high-speed rail from London to Birmingham and then on to Manchester and Leeds. They're now saying it might not end in London.
Well, why do you think it was in the first place?
It's like a staircase that you have to jump down.
I was going to say, there's probably a lot of people in the north who are thinking, thank goodness it's not going to go all the way to London. It'll stop just before it gets there.
Again, the high-speed... the Elizabeth line manages to bypass the 2 major stations to the north, Euston and King's Cross. So it goes from Paddington to Liverpool Street, carefully avoiding linking up with the rest of the country. Who thought that plan up?
A 12-year-old.
I don't guess.
It's...
Everything's so well run, isn't it?
On that note, ladies and gents,
thank you both
Liz
very much
Kershaw,
indeed.
Thank you very much indeed.
Let's bring you up to date. A former soldier found guilty of killing a man at an army checkpoint in Northern Ireland more than 30 years ago is going to be sentenced today. David Holden was convicted in November of the manslaughter of Aidan McAnees back in 1988. He was the first veteran to be found guilty of a historical offence since the Good Friday Agreement.
King's College London has discovered a new test that could detect Alzheimer's years before a clinical diagnosis. The university collected blood samples from people with mild cognitive impairment. The college found the blood test can spot cognitive changes and predict the risk that Alzheimer's may present 3.5 years before being diagnosed.
Former Health Secretary Matt Hancock was paid £320,000 to appear on the ITV show in I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. The fee has been listed on the MP's Register of Financial Interests. He had the Conservative Party whip suspended for taking part of the show while Parliament was sitting, and more than 1,000 complaints were made to the broadcasting watchdog Ofcom.
Now, today is Holocaust Memorial Day, and of course it's a sombre and important time where we remember the millions of people lost in the Holocaust under Nazi persecution. It's important to remember so we don't repeat it. That's the key, isn't it? Tributes will be paid from across the world to others killed in mass genocides.
So we're honoured to be joined this morning by the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors, Noemi Lupian, and the grandson of a Nazi war criminal and SSS officer, Derek Nyman. It is wonderful to have you both in the studio.
Thank you.
And I think perhaps we should begin by explaining how the 2 of you, the daughter of people who died in the camps, or the granddaughter of people who died in the camps, the grandson of a man who was responsible very often for putting them there, how you got together, you 2?
Well, I was speaking in a synagogue about my grandfather's story, and when I finished, a lady sitting at the back came to the front and said, I want us to speak together. And that was Noemi.
And that was you. Why did you do that?
I felt it's important for people to understand that anyone is capable of doing it, and to show the difficulty of 2 sides reconciling, but also the positivity of it, that human beings are able to reconcile, are able to be tolerant, and are able to do positive things, we all have choices. And also to show that Derek and I are indeed, you can look at us, ordinary people. Our parents were ordinary people, our grandparents were ordinary people. So we all have the ability to do good and evil. And therefore, that's what makes Holocaust education and commemoration relevant today.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I've spoken to people like yourself, Noemi, before, Holocaust survivors themselves. I've never met anyone, Derek, who at least has said, well, my relative, my grandfather in your case, was a Nazi war criminal. And I wonder what impact, once you eventually found out about your history, what impact that has had on you and how you view family.
Well, I didn't find out until I was 50 years old, and that was purely by chance. And at the time, I was paranoid because I thought, there's this huge family secret. What else lies beneath? But then, as a writer, I felt I wanted to explore this and write about it, and also speak to people and try to make sense of why he behaved the way he did, and maybe to act as a warning. And the real benefit was when Noemi said, can we speak together? Because we go to many, many schools, and the kids are used to social media, hatred. They're not used to people saying, be nice to each other.
Do you think that it was a secret, effectively, in your family, passed from your grandfather to your father, because there was shame associated with what he'd done? And if so, how does that affect you?
There's no question it was covered up, because both my father and my aunt, who lived in Scotland, told everybody that they lived in Munich, because they said, if we'd said we'd lived in Dachau, people would have...
They would have made the link immediately.
It would. And my dad told little white lies to me all his life. And I think he believed them. That was the thing. He wasn't telling me untruths, because he now come to the point where he believed. He said my dad was just a lowly bank clerk.
What fascinates me, Noemi, from what you said just before, was you talking about, you're ordinary people, we're all ordinary people, but so were our parents and grandparents. Of course, Derek's grandparent was in the SS.
Yes.
Now, that's really important, I think, that someone from your background is saying, well, actually, some of these people who perpetrated these awful crimes actually ultimately were just ordinary people who somehow got swayed into this.
Correct. And I think that is really important, because we don't want it to happen again. And if we make these people up as monsters or extraordinary, with extraordinary powers, then we're doing a disservice to the perpetrator and indeed to the victims too. And so we must recognise and accept that we have it all in us, good and evil. And as Derek says, it's much easier to hate than to be kind.
I think people watching this will be so impressed and staggered even by the fact that the two of you, who come from poles difference in this situation, are able to come together to give a single message. It must have, did it take a lot of difficulty and emotion and feelings that you had to express to each other before you were in a position to be able to do this?
We learned by stages, and we had points where one of us would upset the other, but we'd gained enough trust to say, you're doing this wrong. For example, I once introduced Noemi as an Orthodox Jew, the daughter of Holocaust survivors. And after the talk, Noemi said, I'd rather you said I was a person who happens to be Jewish. Don't be defined by my religion.
Because we don't introduce anybody else as this is the Christian, this is the Muslim.
No, that's
and
a really
indeed, I did the same with Derek. Even though I asked Derek to speak with me and I initiated it, I saw Derek as the Nazi. Even though he's obviously not. So we both had to walk across our metaphorical bridge, which we indeed ask our pupils, our students and our audience to do. And we recognise that it's difficult and that we human beings are prejudiced. And I always say it's a safety device. And so we need education, because it happens as young as the ages of 4 and 5, to teach that it's okay to be different. And it's okay even not to like different and go as far as hate, but not to use words or indeed actions such as murder and savagery to act upon your feelings.
I mean, it's so Lord of the Flies, isn't it? I mean, you sort of... A book about children who turn into savages when they're left alone on an island. There is something innate in all of us which you just think we can get swayed into all of this, which is horrifying in and of itself. Is education enough? I'm talking to young people especially. Is it enough to almost nip that in the bud, do you think, Derek?
I think it's important for the young people to see us as vulnerable, making mistakes and having to learn things. If we just got together and it was all nice and straightforward, there wouldn't be much of a lesson for young people, because some of them might say, I'm a Muslim, how can I speak to a Hindi because blah, 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 blah. But if they see two people from, as you say, who are poles apart, working to cross a bridge together and having difficulties and being prepared to expose our vulnerabilities, then I think it just blows young people away.
Don't get me wrong when I ask you this question, but when you are talking together to particularly young people, do you find that you need to justify what your grandfather did, to excuse what he did? Are you explaining away what he did? Or are you actually prepared to come out and say, my grandfather was a monster?
I'm prepared to say I have no excuses for my grandfather. He did what he did because it benefited him. Never mind what it did to other people. I can't go into my grandfather's mind because he was dead before I was born. But what I can do is at each point, each critical point in his life, he made the decision to join the SS. He made the decision to stay in the SS for 10 years. He went to all the concentration camps. He saw what was happening. He even recorded it. He wrote it down. And yet he continued. And when he stood in a courtroom, he said, I didn't know any of this.
I think it's quite brave of you, actually, to take that line. I mean, and how about the line that you take when you are talking to pupils? Because you have to have this very emotional reaction with them. Your grandparents, your entire family was so affected by what happened in Dachau and Auschwitz and the gas chambers.
Yes. So my parents' story, my father, who was in 7 concentration camps, and my mum, who was a little girl, who was questioned at gunpoint by the Gestapo while she was in prison, they hear what happens when you let extremities rise and gain the upper hand. And that's why education is so important. And I believe the only way to do it is with education. Indeed, the Germans were a people of culture, and yet they could flick. But it needs people to not be bystanders, but upstanders.
Like you two.
Can I say, because it's the phrase has come up, that you say, you know, you have two people who are poles apart. Isn't the key that you're not poles apart?
That's very true. So I always say to people, like with any friendship, we need the chemistry. And I went to meet Derek in the synagogue. I liked what I heard, and I liked Derek. And as our relationship has grown over the years, we continue to like each other more and understand each other more. It's like any friendship or any human relationship. It's the chemistry of two human beings.
And we meet each other's families. I had lunch with Noemi's mother. I want to steal her. Because she's lovely. She's lovely.
Well, I don't know about our viewers, but I have to tell you, I'm not just impressed by the pair of you. I just think that what you're saying is just so emotionally important, historically important. But my goodness, the friendship that you forged, what a lesson that is to all of us.
Well, isn't it? A lesson for the future. Isn't it interesting? Because we look at the past, but we're thinking about the future with it all as well. Noemi, Derek, really good to see you both. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for joining us.
Any thoughts on that? It'd be lovely to hear from you. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Coming up, we've got live coverage of Jeremy Hunt's speech. He's going to be making that about 9:20. This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel. Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday. Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature? And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go. But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
The Chancellor will reveal his plans to pump up productivity and transform the British economy.
Good morning. It's 9 o'clock on Friday, the 27th of January, and this is Breakfast on GB News with Stephen and Angela. And here are your top stories this morning.
British genius and hard work will be at the centre of Jeremy Hunt's new economic growth policy. The Chancellor will unveil his plans in a major speech in London in the next half hour, where he'll also make the case for further investment in British business by tearing up EU red tape. We'll bring you live coverage.
New measures are being brought in to require the public to show photographic ID when they vote. The updated regulations will be in place for this May's local elections. But do you think that this is the right way to protect our democracy?
And 1 in 6 shops in Scotland are vacant, causing more concerns for the future of the high street. The data released by the Scottish Retail Consortium also warns that vacancy rates at retailers may struggle to ever fully recover. We'll be live in Glasgow with our Scotland reporter to tell us more.
And of course, as ever, you can join in on any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, Jeremy Hunt is going to use a major speech today, in about half an hour from now, actually, to insist that he is serious about boosting economic growth in the UK, as he outlines proposals to unlock 100 billion of investment.
Well, the Chancellor plans to focus on key growth industries like digital technology, advanced manufacturing and also creative industries. And he's going to set out a long-term plan to tackle poor productivity.
And Mr Hunt will suggest that a wider bonfire of EU rules will be needed because ministers need to push ahead with plans to review an all-EU law, which is still on the UK statute book this year.
Well, let's talk to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who's here in the studio. Morning, Tom. So what are we expecting?
Well, this is an interesting pitch from the Chancellor, of course, because he has been accused of being a little bit too curmudgeonly about the state of the economy, a little bit too dour. Sort of when the Rishi Sunak administration came in and scrapped away all of the sort of boosterish Liz Truss policies, the supply side reform, the tax cuts, that was all chucked away. And there are many people in the Tory party, there are many backbenchers, some of whom who have now organised themselves into the growth group of Conservative MPs, led by two of Liz Truss's former cabinet ministers, Ranil Jayawardena and Simon Clarke. That's a sizable group of MPs who are thinking that the government isn't talking enough about growth, isn't doing so much to promote the United Kingdom, and has thrown the baby out with the bathwater of the Liz Truss administration. That's a genuine concern for a lot of people, and it has seemed as though the Prime Minister has been so focused on bearing down on inflation that that's sort of been to the exclusion of growth policy. This speech today is sort of, I suppose, trying to counter that narrative, saying that this is a government that does care about economic growth, that there is a long-term plan for the future, that there will be some sense of supply-side reform. And we already saw a sort of hint of that with the Edinburgh reforms that were announced by Jeremy Hunt towards the end of last year, liberalising financial services in the United Kingdom. But there's so much more to do, and to some extent, the Chancellor will focus on a lot of this EU law that is still on the UK statute book, the ability to diverge from that being a benefit of Brexit that really the government hasn't taken advantage of at this stage.
Which is why he's saying that, excuse me, there's 100 billion there to be released by getting rid of some of those rules. But we were talking to David Mellor earlier, who was in the Treasury, of course, when he was an MP. And he was saying that really the public just want politicians to be honest with them. Isn't that what Jeremy Hunt is trying to do you think, today with his speech? He is being honest about the fact that we do need to do so much more to get the economy off the floor, as it were, but at the same time be aware that the coffers are empty.
Yes, it's a very difficult balancing act for the Chancellor to take today, because he doesn't want to seem too dour about the UK economy. That could, in itself, if he's too pessimistic, that could put off private investment or overseas foreign direct investment. But similarly, he doesn't want to seem like he's out of touch with reality. Obviously, the country's going through a tough time right now, as many countries around the world are as well. There is high inflation, there is low growth. So he's got to strike that very delicate balance to say there's so much potential here in this country, and there are things we can do to get things going. But of course, we recognise that we're in a bit of a sticky wicket as things stand. That's a very difficult political message to balance.
Is it actually a buyer's market at the moment as far as investors are concerned? I mean, with high inflation, with concerns over importing goods and services and all the rest of it, we're talking about £100 billion worth of investment. We've got to persuade these people to invest that money if it can legally be released.
Well, there are some sort of shortcuts here. The 100 billion, to some extent, refers to all of this sort of pension fund money that at the moment has very strict rules that were imposed by the EU upon how they can invest. With those rules being liberalised, there will be this ability for this money to be invested in the United Kingdom in a way that it hasn't been before. Now, that is something that, to some extent, that money sort of wants to invest anyway. And so liberalising that and allowing that sort of tidal wave of investment to come down is something that may well be a surer bet than some other things. However, there are some big challenges as well. Yeah. Jeremy Hunt, when he stood to become Prime Minister, if we remember when he ran to be Prime Minister back in 2019 and indeed briefly last year as well, he was standing on a platform of cutting corporation tax. And yet as Prime Minister, yet as Chancellor, I should say, he has raised corporation tax. And that is obviously going to put off some of those foreign direct investments. And indeed, the super deduction, one of Rishi Sunak's prize policies when he was Chancellor, this ability for companies to invest tax-free in this country up to a certain level, that's ending this year. And so we're having this double whammy of corporation tax rising, investment allowances ending. Where else is this investment going to come from if that's the taxation environment?
Which is why they weren't happy about what they heard from Davos, I'm assuming, where people there at the conference were saying they weren't really interested in investing in Britain.
It's a really tricky situation, and there does need to be, I suppose this speech today is trying to counteract that impression.
Yeah, OK. Tom, don't go anywhere, because as soon as Mr Hunt starts to speak, we'll be chatting through it all with you. In the meantime, new figures show 1 in 6 shops in Scotland are vacant. It's one of the highest rates in the UK.
Well, the Scottish Retail Consortium warned that vacancy rates may struggle to ever fully recover.
Let's talk to our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire, who joins us now. Morning to you, Tony. I mean, really, what does this look like in reality? What's it like in the street behind you?
So, good morning. I'm in Sauchiehall Street, which once upon a time, in days of yore, was really Glasgow's premier jewel in the crown of shopping districts. I walk along this street today and it's barely recognisable. We've got behind me and behind my right shoulder here is BHS. Now, if you cast your minds back, BHS went under in 2015, and this property has actually been empty since 2016. It's a corner property on, one of Glasgow's busiest thoroughfares. It really paints quite a grim picture here.
You may be in Sauchiehall Street there in Glasgow, but it's a story that's repeated across the country, isn't it?
Indeed, yes. I mean, certainly, obviously, my job takes me all over Scotland, whether that be Dundee, Edinburgh, and what we're seeing here is the real degradation. Now, the Scottish Retail Consortium has basically said that the problems may have existed before, but certainly COVID and the lockdown was a huge impact on that. Now, Scotland, of course, had, a slightly longer lockdown running into 2021. And as you said there earlier, the threat is now that shops in Scotland and Scotland's High Street may not ever recover. Now, it's not the same for every shop premises in Scotland. If we look at retail parks, then certainly, those destination shopping centres seem to actually have sort of come out of this relatively unscathed. It's really in places like this, in city centres and town centres across the country where that impact is most felt. And certainly, in the same time, if I may just add, in Amazon, in 2020, they saw almost a 200% rise in profits, and that kind of convenience and that kind of delivery process for people, it was obviously really hard to let go of that. And the real suffering parties here are the local independent shops and boutiques in towns and cities across the country.
Yeah, so what does the Scottish Retail Consortium, briefly, Tony, what do they want?
I think they probably want more money from the Scottish Government in order to support businesses to stop more going under. But certainly, if you're a local business looking for a property around Glasgow city centre or Edinburgh, or or even one of the smaller locations around Scotland, then certainly it would be a hard sell when the option is to sell online and not have so many extreme overheads. But, I've got a quote here from the Scottish Retail Consortium, again, that really says the fallout of the cost of living crunch and the pandemic is still exerting a heavy toll. So what we know at the minute is that shops are suffering, and hopefully, I'm sure all my Scots along with me are hoping that we can actually populate all of these empty spaces around cities and towns again.
And not fill them up just with charity shops. You actually want, and what we were talking about earlier, wasn't it? Getting proper shops and also getting people with an entrepreneurial spirit to take up those businesses.
Yeah. Tony, thanks very much indeed. Good to see you. Now, let's tell you about the Electoral Commission, because they and councils across the country are urging us all to make sure we're prepared for this year's May elections.
And that's because for the first time in Great Britain, voters in all elections in England and some elections in Scotland and Wales will have to show a photo ID at their polling station in order to get their ballot.
Well, Jack Carson has been looking into it all.
In this year's local elections, history will be made. It will be the first time that voters in Great Britain will have to show a photo ID in order to get their ballot. It's not new to the UK, with Northern Ireland having the rule in place since 2002, but for voters in Britain, the change came as part of the 2022 Elections Act. There was opposition that it might disenfranchise voters, but the passing of the bill into law in April of last year means the electorate is now being asked to make sure it's prepared for this summer. Craig Westwood from the Electoral Commission explains what will be new for voters when they head to the polls for the local elections.
After each set of elections, there are a lot of people that do feel concerned that you can go into a polling station and get a ballot paper without having to demonstrate and confirm who you are. So there won't be that much difference. So you will go in and you will find a desk of a presiding officer and their team in front of you. They will ask for your name and address, check it off on the electoral register, as is normally the practice. But then there'll be an additional step of them asking to see your photo ID. There are lots of different types of ID which are eligible. They'll check that ID, and then once it's confirmed, they'll give you your ballot paper.
Not everyone is pleased the introduction of voter ID is here. Dr Jess Garland from the Electoral Reform Society still has concerns about its practicality.
The government's asking voters to bring photographic ID. It's a type of ID that we know from the government's own research that over 2 million, about 4% of people don't actually have. And we know that it's also not equally spread across society. So if you're unemployed, if you're older, if you have a disability, you're much less likely to have the sort of ID that the government's asking you to provide in order to vote. And so clearly that is taking a huge risk with the next election. What we don't want to see is people being turned away from the polling station just because they don't have the right papers.
The Electoral Commission report on electoral fraud in 2014 found no evidence of systematic polling station fraud, but warned that polling stations remain vulnerable because of the few checks in place to check identity. Obtaining the most common forms of photo ID, such as a passport or driving licence, involves a fee, but the Electoral Commission stress a free voter authority certificate will ensure no member of the electorate is left out.
It is right that if people don't have eligible ID, including the free ID that's available, they will not be able to vote on polling day. But there are some other groups, such as the over 85s, who have lower levels of ID ownership. For them and for all other people who don't have ID, as you say, the voter authority certificate is there, and that is a free backup so that anybody who doesn't have ID can still make sure they get to vote on polling day.
The full list of accepted forms of ID is available on the government website, so people can be sure they're not caught out at the polling station from this summer onwards. Jack Carson, GB News.
Well, look, more to come for you, including the Chancellor's major economic speech, live right here on GB News in just a few minutes.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone.
My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway...
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and me, Angela, who is just sitting in for just a couple of weekends while Anne takes a well-deserved break.
Oh, yes, she'll be having a lovely time. She'll be on a Bacardi.
She will.
Not this time of day. But there you go, she'll have a nice time. Look, we're just sitting by and waiting for Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, who's going to be making this key speech. We think about 20 past, but as we wait for him to get to the podium, our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, is here. And it's going to be interesting because is he outlining something which is going to significantly show how we're going to go for growth in the UK? Or is he just, as Peter Spencer was saying earlier on, potentially just whistling in the wind?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of re-announcement today. There are some things that the government has previously committed to that will be set out in stone by the Chancellor today. The biggest one, the one that has been trailed, is this unlocking of £100 billion of investment through the repeal of something called Solvency II, an EU regulation that means that pension funds must have a certain amount in reserve. Reforms will allow them to have a smaller amount in reserve and therefore they'll be allowed to invest more.
Can I just ask on that, is that dangerous? Because we had, I mean, it was, when was Maxwell? 90s? And there was all these sort of concerns, wasn't there, about pension stability.
What he was doing with the pension fund, yes.
Yeah, there's always a balance to have, but I think there's a general understanding in the industry, in government, and indeed in other parts of the world other than the EU, that the balance has been struck wrong with Solvency II, that it's gone too overzealous, too cautious, and that's restricting the growth prospects of particularly the United Kingdom that has such large pension funds and such a vast amount of money that's just sitting there when it could be better being invested in projects in the United Kingdom.
But that's what the pension funds want to do, isn't it? Always they're looking for ways of increasing the amount of money they have in the pot so that when they need to pay out, there's more than enough there to actually meet the demand. But I'm just wondering whether or not today, as well as just, we're all sitting here waiting for the mood music coming from Mr Hunt, whether or not it's actually going to make any difference to the Tories standing in the polls at the moment, because they are... not at all impressive, are they?
Well, Jeremy Hunt was one of those cabinet ministers, around 30 of them, sitting in Chequers yesterday when they were given this presentation from Isaac Levido. He's the guy that ran the 2019 general election campaign for Boris Johnson and the Tories. And now we don't know exactly what he said, but it seems that he was saying pretty much there's a very narrow path to victory, that they shouldn't expect any big moves in the polls in any short order, that they can lay the groundwork now, but they won't expect to see any big shift in the polls in the coming months. That is a long-term project, and the election could be up to 2 years away, so there is time to build it back. But at the moment, the government is less focused on chasing after those poll gains and more focused on trying to lay foundations on which they can build. And I think today's speech is one of those pieces to that puzzle, trying to counteract a sort of impression that this is a dour government, that this is a government that isn't optimistic or, dare I say, boosterish about the prospects of Britain. We'll be hearing precisely the opposite sort of rhetoric from Jeremy Hunt today, trying to say how optimistic he is about Britain.
It's interesting because the polls, the general polling, if you like, is not good, but also there's been polling indicating that Labour at the moment seems to be, the figures aren't very high, but nevertheless rating higher in trust on the economy.
Yes, it is extraordinary, but this is what the GB News People's poll has found this week, that specifically when the question is asked, Keir Starmer and the Labour Party.
Yes.
There's more trust in that sort of package in terms of running the British economy than Rishi Sunak and the Conservative Party. Now, a lot of this will be to do with the divisions in the Conservative Party. Clearly, there are the sort of the Trussites and perhaps, dare I say, the Sunakites. I'm not sure that is a phrase that has yet entered political lexicon. But clearly, the Labour Party has managed a very, very clever media campaign over the last year and a half, sort of defanging their proposition, making the Labour Party seem less scary than it ever did under Jeremy Corbyn, saying that they would stick to certain fiscal rules, that they wouldn't borrow they wouldn't borrow at all to spend day to day, they would only borrow to invest, and saying that they wouldn't do some things that they promised to do last time around. Of course, Keir Starmer's come under political criticism for ditching all of the promises that he stood on to become leader of the Labour Party, whether it was mass nationalisations or abolishing student tuition fees or anything else, all of these expensive policies that the Labour Party has now ditched. Well, that's been a concerted strategy to some extent, to try and make them seem more credible. I suppose the only political question that answers then, well, if they ditched all of those policies in order to get elected, might they U-turn again? Could they be trusted on various questions? And that's the line that the Conservative Party's been trying to push recently.
And they're actually also trying to wipe out the memory of the famous note that was left on the desk of the Chancellor when he came into number 11. After the last Labour government, there's no money in the bank.
That's right. That famous note. Liam Byrne.
Liam Byrne, yes, yeah.
But the Conservative Party has been bringing out and posting photographs of at every election subsequently. However, I think the longer we get from 2010, that sort of institutional memory does start to fade. And to some extent, the Conservative Party do need to say what they have done and talk about their successes more than just, we're better than the other lot.
I think he said that there is no money, isn't it?
That's right.
That's what he said. But, if I can just ask you, because we were just talking about the meeting that they had down at Chequers over the weekend, in that closed meeting, as well as talking about what is happening to the economy at the moment and the party in general, because the other story we've been covering today is about the former Chancellor and what is going to happen to him. In that closed situation, would they have been talking about what they should... I mean, I know that the Prime Minister has asked an independent investigation into this, but would they have been discussing that and his future at that meeting as well?
Well, I think it's unlikely that they would have done it in terms, but I think it is almost impossible that this elephant in the room would not have been addressed in some way, because, of course, the first part of the day yesterday at Chequers was political cabinet.
Yes.
Now, that's about party politics matters, and we don't get official readouts for that. We get official readouts for what was done at Cabinet proper. Now, that was later in the day, a very long meeting, and we got a readout later than we were expecting, actually, last night, from this sort of discussion over the 5 key policy areas of the government. But clearly, in the earlier part of the day, when the policy matters when the politics matters, I should say, were being discussed, when that presentation over the standing in the polls were being discussed, when they were told about the need for party unity and how the country is seeing the Conservative government right now, there is no doubt that big scandal over Nadeem Zahawi would be discussed around that table, and it would be particularly eerie because, after all, he was sitting there.
Yes, exactly.
I tell you what's interesting at the moment, though, with all of this, is there is a sense, isn't there, that elections are always about centre ground, despite what Jeremy Corbyn or Liz Truss seems to think. It's always about centre ground. That centre ground does seem to be occupied more by Keir Starmer. And there's not a lot between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, is there, honestly? But it does seem that he is edging into that Tony Blair area that proved to be very successful.
Well, it's interesting how similar Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer are. These are two technocratic individuals, two perhaps quite nerdy individuals, people who haven't been praised. Nothing wrong with nerdy, but these are people who have not been praised for their verbosity or theatrics or ability, quite frankly, at the dispatch box. These are analytical people, technocratic people, rather than the kind of Boris Johnsons or, dare I say it, Winston Churchills of the past, Ronald Reagans even. You know, you get these sort of people who tend to be more chairman of the board type leaders. Tony Blair might be another example, who are perhaps more showy in the way that they lead a country and perhaps less obsessed with detail. And then you get the people that are obsessed with detail, perhaps more like Gordon Brown, more like Clement Attlee, more like Theresa May. And I think in the sense we've got both party leaders sort of fitting that mould more than the bold leadership mould right now. It's interesting just how similar these two people are. In another universe, it's not impossible to see that they could be in the same party.
Yeah. And I mean, whatever Hunt announces today, it's not going to happen immediately anyway, is it? There's going to be a time lag, isn't there, before any of the policies that he's going to announce today come into effect?
That's certainly true. We are expecting a budget as well, just in a few months' time. And that's interesting because the tradition is that nothing is announced about that key fiscal statement that could move markets before then. But we might get hints in terms of the direction that's going. So I don't think we should expect today to be an absolute menu, a proper list of policy by policy what's going to happen. We're going to get more of a flavour. We're going to get some key examples of policy, some which have already been announced, but we're going to hear in a more firm sense. But also this sense of direction, and clearly also a message to international markets. After all, this is a speech that's being given at Bloomberg's headquarters in London, talking about how Britain isn't out for the count yet. We're going to hear, for example, in the speech, the Chancellor say that since 2010, the United Kingdom has grown faster than France, it's grown faster than Italy, it's grown faster than many of the countries in continental Europe, and indeed, since the Brexit referendum, it's grown at the same rate as Germany.
OK, Tom, thank you very much indeed. Yes. Well, the Chancellor has got to his feet. Let's have a listen in.
Us at Bloomberg. From the way we communicate and collaborate to the way we buy and sell goods and services, digital technology has transformed nearly every aspect of our economic lives. How do I know that? Because I too, just like Matt, asked ChatGPT to craft the opening lines of this speech. And who needs politicians when you've got AI? Like other countries, the UK has been dealing with economic headwinds caused by a decade of black swan events. A financial crisis, a pandemic, and then an international energy crisis. And my party understands better than others the importance of low taxes in creating incentives and fostering the animal spirits that spur economic growth. But another Conservative insight is that risk-taking by individuals and businesses can only happen when governments provide economic and financial stability. So the best tax cut right now is a cut in inflation. And the plan I set out in the autumn statement tackles that root cause of instability in the British economy. The Prime Minister talked about halving inflation as one of his 5 key priorities, and doing so is the only sustainable way to restore industrial harmony. But today I want to talk about his second priority, to grow the economy. And just in case you weren't completely sure of that, I've helpfully put it up on a screen behind me. We want to be one of the most prosperous countries in Europe. And today I'm going to outline the 4 pillars of our plan to get there. Just as our plan to halve inflation will require patience and discipline, so too will our plan for prosperity and growth. But it's also going to need something else which is in rather short supply: optimism that we can get there. Just this month, columnists from both left and right have talked about an existential crisis, Britain teetering on the edge, and that all we can hope for is that things don't get worse. I welcome the debate, but chancellors too are allowed their say. And I say simply this: declinism about Britain is just wrong. It's always been wrong in the past, and it's wrong today. Some of the gloom is based on statistics that don't reflect the whole picture. Like every G7 country, our growth was slower in the years after the financial crisis than before it. But since 2010, the UK has grown faster than France, Japan and Italy, not at the bottom, but right in the middle of the pack. Since the Brexit referendum, we've grown at about the same rate as Germany. Yes, we've not returned to pre-pandemic employment or output levels, but an economy that contracted 20% in a pandemic still has nearly the lowest unemployment for half a century. And whilst our public sector continues to recover more slowly than we would like from the pandemic, strengthening the case for reform, our private sector has grown 7.5% in the last year. Yes, inflation has risen, but it's still lower than in 14 EU countries, with interest rates rising more slowly than in the US or Canada. And yes, we have to improve our productivity, but output per hour worked is now higher than pre-pandemic. And last week, a survey of business leaders by PwC said the UK was the 3rd most attractive country for CEOs expanding their businesses. Economists and journalists know you can spend a long time arguing the toss on statistics. But the strongest grounds for optimism comes not from debating this or that way of analysing data, but from what we've been hearing about this morning, our long-term prospects. Because when it comes to the innovation industries that will shape and define this century, the UK is powerfully positioned to play a leading role. Let's just look at some of them. In digital technology, as we heard from Michelle, we have become only the 3rd economy in the world with a $1 trillion sector. We've created more unicorns than France and Germany combined, with 8 UK cities now home to 2 or more unicorns. The London-Oxford-Cambridge triangle has the largest number of tech businesses in the world outside San Francisco and New York. PwC say that UK GDP will be up to 10% higher in 2030 because of AI alone. FinTech attracted more funding last year than anywhere in the world outside the US. Or life sciences, where we also have the largest sector in Europe and a brilliant advocate with our superb Science Minister, George Freeman. We produced one of the world's first COVID vaccines, estimated to have saved more than 6 million lives worldwide. We identified the treatment most widely used to save lives in hospitals, saving more than 1 million lives across the globe. We're behind only the US and China in terms of high-quality life science papers published, and every one of the world's top 25 biopharmaceutical firms has operations in the UK. Another big growth area is our green and clean energy sector. The UK is a world leader here, with the largest offshore wind farm in the world. Last year, we were able to generate an incredible 40% of our electricity from renewables. And on one day, a rather windy December the 30th, we actually got 60% of our electricity from renewables, mainly wind. McKinsey estimate that the global market opportunity for UK green industries could be worth more than £1 trillion between now and 2030. And we're proceeding with a new plant at Sizewell C, led by our brilliant business secretary, who also spoke very wisely and surprisingly classically earlier on. And I could also talk about our creative industries, which employ over 2 million people, grew at twice the rate of the UK economy in the last decade, and have made the UK the world's largest exporter of unscripted TV formats, helped give us a top 3 spot in the Portland Soft Power Index. Or our advanced manufacturing sector, key to exports, where we produce around half the world's large civil aircraft wings and its biggest aero engines, as well as around half the world's Formula One Grand Prix cars. And the golden thread running through the industries where Britain does best is innovation. Amongst the world's largest economies, the Global Innovation Index ranks us 4th globally. Those innovation industries now account for around a quarter of our output. They've been responsible for nearly all our productivity growth since 1997. And they're also the reason that all of you are here. In the audience, we've got leaders from Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple and Google, the world's largest tech companies, all with major operations in the UK. We've got Monzo and Revolut, shining examples from our world-beating fintech sector. We have founders and CEOs from some of our most exciting UK technology companies like Proximi and Matilon. You are vital for Britain's economic future, but Britain is vital for your future too. So I want to ask all of you to help our country achieve something that is both ambitious and strategic. I want to ask you to help turn the UK into the world's next Silicon Valley. What do I mean by that? If anyone is thinking of starting or investing in an innovation or technology-centered business, I want them to do it here. I want the world's tech entrepreneurs, life science innovators and green tech companies to come to the UK because it offers the best possible place to make their visions happen. And if you do, we will put at your service not just British ingenuity, but British universities to fuel your innovation, Britain's financial sector to fund it, and a British government that will back you to the hilt. Our universities are ranked 2nd globally for their quality and include 3 of the world's top 10. In order to support the groundbreaking work they do in so many new fields, the government has protected our £20 billion research budget, now at the highest level in history. And as you look for funding to expand, we offer one of the world's top 2 financial hubs and the world's largest net exporter of financial services. The capability of the City of London, combined with the research strengths of our universities, makes our aspiration to be a technology superpower not just ambitious, but achievable. And today I'm here to say the government is determined to make it happen. But like any business embracing new opportunities, we should also be straight about our weaknesses. Structural issues like poor productivity, skills gaps, low business investment, and the overconcentration of wealth in the southeast have led to uneven and lower growth. Real incomes haven't risen by as much as they could as a result. Confidence in the future, though, starts with honesty about the present. So we want to be one of the most prosperous countries in Europe. And today I want to set out our plan to address those issues. That plan, our plan for growth, is necessitated, energised, and made possible by Brexit. The desire to move to a high-wage, high-skill economy is one that's shared on all sides of that debate. And we need to make Brexit a catalyst for the bold choices that will take advantage of the nimbleness and flexibilities that it makes possible. So this is a plan for growth. It's not a series of measures or announcements, which will have to wait, I'm afraid, for budgets and autumn statements in the years ahead. But this plan is a framework against which individual policies will be assessed and taken forward. And I set out that plan, those priorities, under 4 pillars. They build on the people, capital, ideas themes set out by the Prime Minister last year in his May's lecture, and as such are the pillars essential for any modern innovation-led economy. For ease of memory, the 4 pillars all happen to start with the letter E, the 4 E's of economic growth and prosperity, and they are enterprise, education, employment, and everywhere. So let's start with the first E, which is enterprise. If we're to be Europe's most prosperous economy, we need to have, quite simply, its most dynamic and productive companies. Now, there's a wide range of literature citing the importance of entrepreneurship on business dynamism, whereby more productive firms enter and grow and less productive firms shrink. But I don't just believe the theory, I've put it into practice. I set up and ran my own business for 14 years. It was one of the best decisions I ever made, and I actually owe it to Margaret Thatcher and Nigel Lawson. Because by the time I got to university and was thinking about my career options, they had changed attitudes towards entrepreneurship. Had they not, I would probably have ended up in the city or the civil service. Instead, I took a different route to end up in the Treasury, less the fast stream, more the long way round. But like thousands of others setting up on their own, I learnt to take calculated risks, to live with uncertainty, and to work through failures, of which there were many. Every big business was a startup once. And we won't build the world's next Silicon Valley unless we nurture battalions of dynamic new challenger businesses. Today, we are already ranked by the World Bank as one of the best places to do business amongst large European nations, second only to America in the G7. And the result of that pro-business climate is that since 2010, we've created more than 1 million new businesses in this country. But the question I want to ask is, how are we going to generate the next million? And firstly, we need lower taxes. In Britain, even after recent tax rises, we have one of the lowest levels of business tax as a proportion of GDP amongst major countries. But we should be explicit. High taxes directly affect the incentives which determine decisions by entrepreneurs, investors, or larger companies about whether to pursue their ambitions in Britain. With volatile markets and high inflation, sound money must come first. But our ambition should be to have nothing less than the most competitive tax regime of any major country. That means restraint on spending. In case anyone is in any doubt about who will actually deliver that restraint to make a low-tax economy possible, I gently point out that in the 3 weeks since Labour promised no big government chequebook, they've made £45 billion of unfunded spending commitments. But it isn't just about lower taxes. We also need a more positive attitude to risk-taking. Let's start with one of the most public risks taken this year. Richard Branson, his team and the UK Space Agency deserve massive credit for getting Launcher 1 off the ground in Cornwall. The mission may not have succeeded this time, but what we learn from it will make future success more likely. And we should heed the words of Thomas Edison, who said, "I haven't failed 10,000 times. I've successfully found 10,000 ways that will not work." Edison was American, and our attitude to risk in this country can still be too cautious compared to our US friends. But we are capable of smart risk-taking in this country. At the start of the pandemic, we bought over 350 million doses of vaccine without knowing if they would actually work. And we ended up with one of the fastest, most effective vaccine programs in the world. We also need, if we're going to deliver those competitive enterprises, smarter regulation. Brexit's an opportunity not just to change regulations, but also to work with our experienced, effective and independent regulators to create an economic environment which is more innovation friendly, and more growth-focused. Our Chief Scientific Advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, is currently reviewing how the UK can better regulate emerging technologies in high-growth sectors, and the government's identifying where to reform the laws we inherited from the EU. In the digital space, Sir Patrick is working with the brilliant Matt Clifford, who we heard from earlier, and our amazing Culture Secretary, Michelle Donnellan, both of whom gave excellent speeches. Before we conclude those findings, we want to hear from you, and that's why we've invited you this morning. And we'll repeat that process for green industries, life sciences, creative industries, and advanced manufacturing. Finally, when it comes to the E of enterprise, there is a critical need for easier access to capital, particularly scale-ups. I'm supporting important changes to the pensions regulatory charge cap. I've used the regulatory flexibility provided by Brexit to change the Solvency II regulations, which will begin to be implemented in the coming months. Alongside other measures announced in the Edinburgh reforms, this could unlock over £100 billion of additional investment into the UK's most productive growth industries. But there's much more to be done, and I want to harness the ideas and expertise in this room to turn the E of enterprise into an enterprise culture built on low taxes, reward for risk, access to capital, and smarter regulation. Now, the next E is education. And this is an area where we have made dramatic progress in recent years, thanks to the work of successive Conservative education ministers. The UK has risen nearly 10 places in the global school league tables for maths and reading since 2015 alone. Our teachers and lecturers are some of the very best in the world. As the Prime Minister said, having a good education system is the best economic, moral and social policy any country can have. And that's why in the autumn statement we gave schools an extra £2.3 billion of funding, and why the Prime Minister recently prioritised the teaching of maths until 18. But there is much to improve. We don't do nearly as well for the 50% of school leavers who don't go to university as we do for the ones who do. We have around 9 million adults with low basic literacy or numeracy skills, over 100,000 people leaving school every year unable to reach the required standard in English and maths. And that matters. We are becoming an adaptive economy in which people are likely to have to train for not one, but several jobs in their working lives. Not having basic skills in reading and maths makes that difficult, sometimes impossible. And equally important is what happens beyond school. We've made progress with T-levels, boot camps and apprenticeships, and Sir Michael Barber is advising the government on further improvements to the implementation of our reform agenda. And we want to ensure our young people have the skills that they would get in Switzerland or Singapore. If we want to reduce dependence on migration and become a high-skill economy, the E of education will be essential. And that means ensuring opportunity is as open to those who don't go to university as to those who do. So, Silicon Valley enterprises, Finnish and Singaporean education and skills. Let me now turn to the third E, which is employment. If companies can't employ the staff they need, they can't grow. High employment levels have long been a strength of our economic model. Since 2010, we have seen a record employment rate, the lowest unemployment in nearly 50 years, and labour market participation at an all-time high. Partly thanks to the coalition reforms of a decade ago, we are at 76% employment levels, higher than Canada, the US, France, or Italy. But the pandemic has exposed weaknesses in our model. Total employment is nearly 300,000 people lower than pre-pandemic, with around 1/5 of working-age adults economically inactive. Excluding students, that amounts to 6.6 million people. an enormous and shocking waste of talent and potential. Of that 6.6 million people, around 1.4 million want to work, but a further 5 million don't. So it's time for a fundamental programme of reforms to support people with long-term conditions or mental illness to overcome the barriers and prejudices that prevent them from working. We will never harness the full potential of our country unless we unlock it for each and every one of our citizens. Nor will we fix our productivity puzzle unless everyone who can participate does. So to those who retired early after the pandemic or haven't found the right role after furlough, I say Britain needs you, and we will look at the conditions necessary to make work worth your while. That's why employment is such a vital third E. Enterprise, education, employment. 3 key components for our long-term prosperity. And I conclude with my final E, everywhere. That means ensuring the benefits of economic development are felt not just in London and the South East, but across the whole of the UK. It is socially divisive if young people feel the only way to make a decent living is to head south. But it's also economically damaging. If our second cities were the productive powerhouses we see in other major countries, our GDP would be nearly 5% higher, making us second only to the United States and Germany for GDP per head. And that's why levelling up really matters, and why last week it was so exciting to see the progress being made. Since February 2020, when the levelling up agenda really got underway, 70% of new employed jobs have been created outside London and the South East. Thanks to our powerhouse regions, we remain one of the top 10 manufacturers globally, and the same is starting to happen with new industries, whether fintech in Bristol, gaming in Dundee, clean energy in Teesside. Every region has seen pay grow faster than London since 2010, which shows that our approach to regional growth is working. But there's much more to do. And whilst government grants can play a galvanising role, they aren't the whole answer. We also need the connectivity that comes from better infrastructure. That's why in the autumn statement we protected key projects like HS2, East West Rail and Core Northern Powerhouse Rail. Digital connectivity matters as well, which is why under Michelle's leadership, full fibre broadband is now available to more than 40% of homes in the UK. Last year, 4 million more premises got access, with the biggest increases in Scotland and Northern Ireland. But the E of everywhere has to be about local wealth creation as much as about local infrastructure. So this year we will announce investment zones, mini Canary Wharfs, supporting each one of our growth industries, each one focused in high potential but underperforming areas, in line with our mission to level up. They'll be focused on our research strengths, executed in partnership with local government, with advantageous fiscal treatment to attract new investment. And we'll shortly start a process to identify exactly where they'll go. But spreading opportunity everywhere needs local decision-making alongside local infrastructure and local enterprise. So we must also give civic entrepreneurs more ability to find and fund their own solutions without having to bang down a Whitehall door. Shortly, over 50% of the population of England will be covered by a devolution deal, and 2/3 covered by a unitary authority, and that's a very important part of that. But we need to move more decisively towards fiscal devolution so that fantastic local leaders like Ben Houchen and Andy Street have the tools they need to deliver for their communities. So 4 E's: enterprise, education, employment, everywhere. 4 E's to unlock our national potential to be one of Europe's most exciting, most innovative, and most prosperous economies. Bill Gates is supposed to have said people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10. When it comes to the British economy, we're certainly not going to fall into that trap, we will remember the essential foundation on which long-term prosperity depends, namely the sound money that comes from bringing down inflation. But right now starts our longer-term journey into growth and prosperity. World-beating enterprises to make Britain the world's next Silicon Valley. An education system where world-class skills sit alongside world-class degrees. Employment opportunities that tap into the potential of every single person so businesses can build the motivated teams they need. And as talent is spread everywhere, so we will make sure opportunities are as well. Yes, there are many structural challenges to address. And working through our 4 pillars, we will do just that. Never forgetting, though, the combination of bold ingenuity and quiet confidence that defines our national character. Ladies and gentlemen, being a technology entrepreneur changed my life. Being a technology superpower can change our country's destiny. So let's make it happen. Thank you very much.